I grew up on a large estate surrounded by nature. It was very isolating, and I had no neighbours until I moved out. The house itself was big and old, prompting many comments from friends comparing it to a horror movie house. When I turned 17, I moved out to go to university, which didn't please my grandparents, who were the other house residents, so I avoided coming back. Ever since I moved out, I started having vivid dreams of walking alone at night, something I had never done. I roamed the streets around the house, always alone and always searching for someone. I was annoyed by the frequency of these dreams, as they came multiple times a week. Around that time, I also started having other odd dreams that resulted in strange coincidences. I dreamt of places I hadn't been in years, and the next day, I got invited to go there. I dreamt of random objects and then received them as gifts. The same thing happened with people. Still, those dreams came and went, but the dream of walking alone persisted. I once went back to the estate for a party a few years later, and decided to take a ride back downtown to go back home. I hopped in a car with some relatives, and another car was following us. It was dark, and the second car got lost. I called the people in the other car and guided them back to the main road. We waited for them in front of an old slaughterhouse, and I mentioned how I dreamt about walking down those roads almost every night, even though I had never done so. The people in the car all believed in spiritualism, and one of them said that I should pay more attention to those dreams. I shrugged it off and let it go. When I turned 20, I decided to move back with my grandparents and return to living in that house. The dreams became more frequent. A few months after moving back, my grandparents had to leave town for a few days, but I couldn't go with them as I had to shoot some things for university. They left on a Friday afternoon, and I invited a friend to sleep over with me. She had to take a train and then call an Uber to get to my house, something she had done multiple times. She ended up being late and arrived in my town almost at midnight. It should have taken about half an hour for her to get from the train station to my house, but as time passed, she didn't arrive. I was getting desperate when she called me at 1:01 to tell me that the driver refused to drive around those roads at night and had dropped her off on a road. She sent me a picture that looked like the end of my street, so I told her to just walk and I would find her. It was a short walk that should have lasted around 2 minutes, but she never came. She called me again, saying that she was lost, and sent me a picture of a house. I told her to stay there and I would go looking for her. I walked around those streets alone, in a white nightgown and pin curls in my hair. I roamed those streets for what felt like hours. I considered getting the car keys and searching for her, but I didn't know how to drive. There are a lot of cliffs around here, and I went around all of them trying to find the house that she had sent me a picture of. I had recorded some videos and sent them to another friend, asking for advice. She told me to call an Uber to pick her up, so I did that. I kept trying to find the house just by its number, just in case. The Uber arrived, and after I calmed down, I started questioning my friend about the identity of the woman who had led her into the house. She described her to me, and I decided to look for her to thank her. I called another one of my friends, who was supposed to join us the following day, to tell her the story. Her boyfriend answered and said she was in the hospital because she had poured boiling water on her hands and needed medical attention. I noticed she had called me the same time the accident happened, which coincidentally was at 1:01. The same time my lost friend had called me to tell me that she was lost. After that night, the dreams of walking in the woods stopped. I had driven by the area multiple times searching for the house and never found it. I live in fear that I will have to walk there by myself again and that something worse will happen. I, F23, just randomly remembered this incident from my childhood. I've told a few people about it, including my mum and my boyfriend, but mostly keep it to myself since it doesn't really come up in my mind that much. However, after watching some paranormal/demonic videos on YouTube, I felt compelled to share. When I was around 5 or 6, my dad bought his first house after we had lived in an apartment for most of my young life. When we moved in, things were mostly normal. The house would creak, but my dad chalked it up to settling noises as it was newly built with no prior history. I used to be fairly scared of paranormal and demonic occurrences, having experienced a few in my young life. I also had anxiety from a very young age, so any strange noise in the house would frighten me, often leading me to seek comfort in my dad's bed to fall back asleep. My dad obliged until my stepmom moved in and felt it was time for me to learn to self-soothe and stop coming into their bed whenever I got scared, which was around the age of 8 or 9. Now, one very specific night, something extremely frightening happened, and the strangest part is, I don't even remember it. My parents still swear to this day that it happened, and they're as puzzled as I am that I have no recollection of it. What I do remember is waking up one night lying on my stomach, although I have no idea what time it was. I distinctly remember hearing 2 growling noises coming from under my bed. It wasn't like a dog's growl or a human mimicking one. It was primal, deep, and menacing. To clarify, we had no pets at that time, so it couldn't have been a dog. Strangely, in my half-asleep state, I fell back asleep almost immediately after hearing the growling. I just remember hearing the growls and then blacking out. It's odd to think about because I know that if I had been fully awake, I would have at least sat up and screamed. I was easily frightened as a child and still am as an adult. The next thing I remember is waking up in my parents' bed, sitting up and not remembering how I got there. Immediately, both of them sat up with me, as if they had been lightly sleeping, and asked if I was okay. Confused and tired, I told them I was fine. I apologized for finding my way into their bed, and started to get up to return to my own bedroom. However, my dad stopped me and had me turn around so he could look at the back of my leg, near my calf and hamstring. I had woken up screaming and nearly broke down their door, banging on it and begging to be let inside. They lock their door at night. As parents, they immediately knew something was wrong and opened the door without hesitation. My dad told me that I had clung to him, still screaming and crying that there was a demon under my bed and that it had scratched me. He turned on the lights and, sure enough, both of them recall seeing a distinct set of scratches on my leg. They were spaced like human fingers, not like a cat scratch or a scrape from something. They were intentional, red and raised. My dad said he immediately searched and found nothing under the bed with a flashlight, checked my closet, and even walked around outside. Everything was locked, including the house and windows. They let me sleep in their bed because I was understandably inconsolable, and they didn't want me to sleep alone at that point anyway. When my dad checked my leg again, the scratches were gone. There was nothing there to prove that anything had happened. To this day, it shocks me that I don't remember a single moment except for the growling. It's as if the memory has been deleted from my mind. Could it have been traumatic enough that I blocked it out immediately? Like, the very next day, being confused about the situation as if it had never happened. Some might just say I was just an anxious child with nightmares. But with both of my parents insisting that it happened, I can't just simply downplay it and act like nothing happened. It remains a truly unexplainable event in my life. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. My family home is haunted by its previous owners. I don't remember who discovered this, but long before my family owned a house, A couple lived there. They couldn't have children despite their efforts, so it was just the husband and his wife. One day, the husband fell ill and passed away in the basement, which served as the main living area containing their bedroom and bathroom. Shortly after his death, it is said that the wife died from a broken heart or something similar. Now, my family owns the house, and we believe the wife wore either a grieving gown until her death or possibly a wedding dress, but it's hard to discern. We often see her as a dark shadow at the end of the hallway or in our peripheral vision, so we've never been certain. The husband's presence seems confined to the basement. One specific incident I recall vividly. I was setting up a hammock in the basement next to a bin full of old toys from when everyone, including my mother, aunt, and uncle, were young. Among them was a dog-like toy with buttons on its paws and ears. I'll attach a photo if permitted. Unexpectedly, it activated on its own, saying,
"That tickles. Do it again."
I wasn't anywhere near it, so I panicked and ran to my uncle. When we returned to inspect the toy, he picked it up to check the battery pack, only to find it completely empty. There was no way it could have functioned with no batteries inside. While he was examining it, the toy started suddenly singing in his hand. We were terrified and ran towards the stairs. Glancing beside me, I saw a life-sized Barbie doll that my mum received when she was around 8 years old. She's 36 now. To my horror, the doll began moving on its own, its arms and legs lifting as if reaching out to us, rocking back and forth. This intensified my fear, and we ran faster. Needless to say, neither my uncle nor I have set foot in that basement since. I think it might have been the old man playing tricks on us, but I'm not entirely certain. From what I've heard, both he and his wife loved children, so I doubt that they would intentionally frighten us like that. I apologize if this story isn't entirely coherent. I'm recounting it as I remember, and I didn't pay much attention in class when it came to writing or storytelling. I've worked at Walmart for 3 years, and I've seen my fair share of weirdos. It's just something that comes with the territory. One particular person I met who worked there, however, is the closest I've knowingly come to true evil. This story isn't going to be like something out of a horror movie, but rather an example of how the scariest things can be the real-life monsters that lurk around us every day. I've changed the names in this story for the purpose of anonymity. To give some context, I'm a 24-year-old girl, and I've received unwanted attention from several older men over my years at Walmart. It's uncomfortable, sure, but usually I'm able to brush them off and avoid them. This all changed for me that day that Andrew started working there. Andrew was in his mid-30s. The first time he spoke to me, I immediately sensed something was off with him. He seemed very overly friendly and flirty, the way a guy speaks to a girl when he clearly has an ulterior motive. I tried to make it seem like I wasn't interested with my body language. He made sure to ask me for my name, which I kind of had to give him since it's right there on my name tag. After our interaction, I thought to myself, I'll just try to avoid him from now on. Unfortunately for me, I couldn't avoid him. We didn't work in the same department, but I would encounter him often while walking through the back room and the sales floor. I could feel his eyes on me every time I walked past him. I just had this intense gut feeling to stay away from him. One day, I had to go down the aisle that Andrew was stocking items in. This was a very narrow aisle, and I really didn't want to be in there alone with him. When he saw me, he immediately started up a conversation. He asked me when my birthday was, and wanted to know how old I was turning. I told him that I will be turning 25, and he seemed in disbelief. I've always been told I look younger than I am. I also have braces, which doesn't help in that regard. His shock about my age set off a major red flag. Did he want me to be younger or something? Another time, the two of us alone in an aisle, Andrew asked me if I lived alone. Again, immediate red flag. I told him that I didn't and that I have a roommate. He then prodded for more information. When I told him I lived with a male friend, he asked if I was dating him. I told him that no, I'm not dating my roommate. He said that his heart sunk at first when I told him that I lived with a man. I wanted to roll my eyes. While talking to other female co-workers, I learned that they also got creepy vibes from Andrew. He treated many of the young women that worked in the store this way. One night, I was on Facebook, and I came across his profile in the People You May Know section. Being curious, I clicked on his page. In one of his recent posts, he said that he had been in jail at one point in his life. This piqued my interest, so I googled his name. I felt my stomach drop as I read the headline that popped up. Man charged with self-seeking 12-year-old girl. Upon clicking the article, I saw his mugshot. It was him. The neck tattoos matched and everything, except for one thing. Andrew wasn't his real name. The article named him as Jeremy. He must have changed his name in an attempt to hide his past. My heart was beating out of my chest as I came to the realization that I, along with my co-workers and friends at Walmart, had been targeted by an actual predator. The next day, I told my manager that I was scared of Andrew and mentioned the article that I had found. Several weeks later, I learned that Andrew was fired. The reason? A 17-year-old employee reported that he was making inappropriate comments to her. He was also found drinking on the job. Doing the math, his 12-year-old victim is 18 now. All I can hope is that she finds peace. I was 18 years old, going through a serious rough patch at home, sleeping a lot during the day, partying at night, drinking, but not taking anything else as I had just stopped smoking weed due to some undesirable effects that made me question my sanity. I generally was not really getting anywhere in life. My parents were arguing a lot at home, and I just didn't want to be anywhere near them. Things were pretty bad. I was semi-flying in private and was definitely sold out, so I worked in a factory at the time and hated every second of it. During one lunch hour at work, I dozed off. This was a normal occurrence for me, and on this occasion, I woke up recalling a vivid dream at which I had a nosebleed at my station. I didn't think much of it. I went back to work, sat at my station, and within minutes, I had the most severe nosebleed of my life without any warning. It was as if a tap had been turned on in my nose. I hadn't had a nosebleed since I was a young child, and that involved falling off my bike. This freaked me out so much that I went home for the rest of the day, much to the annoyance of my supervisor, who had no idea what I had just experienced. It just looked like a nosebleed to him. He had little idea of the existential nightmare going on in my head. When I got home, the house was empty. I did what I normally did when I felt scared and alone. I slept, falling asleep on the sofa which faced the glass French doors in our front room. This time I dreamt that my friend Chris came around and asked me if I wanted to make a spontaneous trip to the south of England, I live in the north, to see our friend Doug for the first time since he moved there several months ago. This wasn't something we'd ever discussed, nor was it something we had ever planned. I was woken up by a knock at the glass. I opened my eyes, and there stood Chris. I opened the door, and word for word, exactly like in the dream, he asked me if I wanted to go to Ipswich to see Doug. I just stood there in bewilderment. I agreed to go with him. I was so disturbed by the dream that I felt that I really had no other choice. And in all fairness, I'm glad I went. I stayed there for several weeks and had a real coming-of-age experience in a vibrant city, experiencing some great times that really opened my eyes. I didn't tell my parents where I was going, and when I finally returned home, the arguing had stopped. I enrolled in college, and things got a little brighter for me. I'm 36 now, married with kids, and the combined experience of that day still freaks me out. I've tried to rationalize it and tried to put it down to just being chance, but it felt so bizarre. The events were exactly the same as in my dream. Were they pivotal moments in my life? Or just like monkeys on a typewriter writing out the entire works of Shakespeare? Sleep enough and dream enough, and one day, you'll dream out the day's events. I like to think the choice to leave work and go to Ipswich to see my friend forever set my life on a different course. Who knows? So, about 3 or so years ago, I dated this guy. Let's call him Jay for security reasons. He told me a story about when he was younger. He ended up finding this old Ouija board. And of course, being the curious kid he was, he messed with it. From that exact day, his life would be forever changed. An ancient presence would forever haunt and stalk him. Jay always told me that ever since then, he has felt like something watches him, and that he encounters things pretty often. I didn't know whether to believe him because I had not witnessed anything while being with him. Now, I'm definitely a spiritual person, and I'm very open-minded when it comes to things, especially the supernatural. So that's why to this day, I still think about that one night. It still gives me chills. Me and Jay liked to listen to creepy encounter podcasts pretty often, and in the back of my mind, I couldn't imagine to think what it would be like. Like if something like that were to happen to me, you find yourself in a situation that seems like it was straight out of a horror podcast or horror movie. The kind you used to listen to for thrills, never expecting to live out your own tale. So one night, me and my ex were winding down for bed and watching Mort's Chilling Tales on YouTube. It started with a scream, chilling and distant, like a little girl's cry from the shadows, the kind that makes you pause and ask, did I really hear that? I muted the TV, and a couple of seconds later, there it was again, a haunting sound on a loop, breaking the silence of the night. It was such an odd sound. Yes, it sounded like a little girl screaming, but it was just off, like something wanted to lure me outside to investigate. The scream sounded like it was on repeat, as if on a record player. For some reason, all my cats reacted, all 4 of them, all at once gathering and hissing towards the door, as if they saw what we couldn't. Then came the tapping, a persistent and sinister rhythm on the windows, doors, and every entrance, as if something unseen was insisting on being let in. This was the most sinister experience I have ever had. After all that, I decided to immediately hide under the bed, and Jay crawled under with me, my heart beating so loud that I thought that whatever was out there could hear me. We held hands as I tried not to make a noise, while tears rolled down my face. Finally, a few minutes later, everything went silent, and my ex and I, frozen with fear, chose not to investigate, to remain within the safety of our home. But now, in hindsight, part of me wonders what might have happened if we had dared to look. To hear about such a story is one thing, but to live it is indescribable. The fear is tangible, a thick presence in the air. Every sense is heightened. Every shadow is suspect. It's an experience that blurs the line between the world we see and the one we feel in the pit of our stomach during our most vulnerable moments. It's a story that leads me to wonder what lurks in the corners of our reality. I know some of you won't believe me, but what I heard that night was unforgettable. If you guys know anything about skinwalkers, I truly believe that what we encountered that night was just that. Feel free to share any opinions you guys have. So I have a creepy story that happened to me when I was 12. My grandparents were staying with my family for a while, and during that period, they decided to go for a walk one day. I didn't want to go at first, but after about half an hour, I decided to follow after them. I told my mum and went off. It was late evening, almost nighttime, so it was pretty ominous outside. So anyway, I'm walking into the park because I assumed they went that way. And when I get closer to the playground area, it's a relatively straight path to the playground as you can see it in the distance after you enter the park, and I see a man crouched behind the bigger kids' play structure. He was bald and kind of creepy looking. I couldn't get a great look though, due to the darkness and distance still between us. I didn't think much of him and took a few more steps, but then I noticed him staring at me, like dead on. I got pretty nervous and just stopped, and I think he moved a little, and I turned around and ran away fast. I looked back while running, and I'm pretty sure he was following me because he was gone from the playground. I kept on running as fast as I could to my house. Luckily, it was close, and got inside quickly and nervously told my mum. I swear I could hear footsteps running on the pavement in the distance behind me as I ran back. But I didn't look back, too nervous to do so. I never saw him again, but it still worries me occasionally to this day. I think I would have been kidnapped, possibly, or something else bad, if I didn't think thoroughly. Michael Joseph Jackson, often hailed as the King of Pop, left an indelible mark on the world with his music, dance, and unparalleled showmanship. However, his life came to a tragic and abrupt end on June 25th, 2009. The circumstances surrounding his death were a mix of personal struggle, professional pressure, and medical mismanagement. In the weeks leading up to his death, Michael Jackson was preparing for his highly anticipated This Is It comeback tour, scheduled to start in London on July 13th, 2009. The tour was meant to be his return to the stage after years of relative seclusion. The rehearsals were intense, with Jackson working tirelessly to perfect every detail. Friends and colleagues noted that he appeared frail and exhausted, yet he remained determined to give his fans a spectacular performance. Dr. Conrad Murray, a cardiologist, had been hired as Jackson's personal physician to oversee his health during the tour preparations. Jackson had a long history of insomnia and relied on several different medications to help him sleep. In the weeks before his death, Dr. Murray administered propofol, a powerful anesthetic, to Jackson on a nightly basis. Propofol is typically used in surgical settings and requires careful monitoring due to its potency and potential risks. On the morning of June 25th, 2009, Jackson was in his rented mansion in the Holmby Hills neighborhood of Los Angeles. Dr. Murray was present, having stayed the night to monitor Jackson after administering propofol. At around 12 p.m., Jackson was found unresponsive in his bedroom. Dr. Murray attempted to revive him using CPR and other measures, but Jackson showed no signs of life. At 12:21 p.m., a 911 call was made by a security guard, and paramedics arrived at the scene shortly thereafter. Despite their efforts to resuscitate him, Jackson was pronounced dead at the Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center at 2:26 p.m. The news of his death spread rapidly, causing an outpouring of grief from fans worldwide. The Los Angeles County Coroner's Office conducted an autopsy, which revealed that Jackson's death was caused by acute propofol intoxication, exacerbated by the presence of benzodiazepines, which are sedatives. The autopsy report classified his death as a homicide, noting that the drugs had been administered by another person, specifically Dr. Murray. Dr. Murray was charged with involuntary manslaughter in February 2010. During the trial, prosecutors argued that Murray had been grossly negligent in his care of Jackson. They pointed to his decision to administer propofol in a home setting without proper monitoring equipment and his failure to provide adequate emergency response when Jackson stopped breathing. Murray's defense contended that Jackson had administered the fatal dose of propofol to himself, but this claim was not supported by the evidence. On November 7, 2011, Dr. Murray was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter and was sentenced to 4 years in prison. He served 2 years before being released in 2013 due to good behavior and overcrowding in Californian prisons. Michael Jackson's death was a significant cultural moment, sparking a global reaction. Fans gathered at makeshift memorials around the world, from Los Angeles to Tokyo, to mourn the loss of an icon. Tributes poured in from fellow musicians, celebrities, and public figures, all acknowledging Jackson's profound impact on music and pop culture. His family, particularly his mother Catherine and his children, were devastated by his passing. Legal battles over Jackson's estate ensued, with various parties contesting the distribution of his assets and the guardianship of his children. Despite these challenges, Jackson's legacy continued to thrive. Posthumous releases of his music, such as the This Is It documentary and album, allowed fans to celebrate his artistry and remember his contributions to the music industry. Jackson's death also brought increased scrutiny to the use of propofol and other sedatives outside of hospital settings. Medical professionals and regulatory bodies emphasize the importance of proper monitoring and the risks associated with the misuse of powerful anesthetics. Michael Jackson's death was a tragic end to a life filled with both immense talent and profound personal challenges. While his passing highlighted issues of medical ethics and celebrity pressure, it also reaffirmed his lasting influence on music and popular culture. Jackson's work continues to inspire new generations of artists, and his story serves as a poignant reminder of the complexities faced by those living in the public eye. In the years following his death, efforts to preserve Jackson's legacy have continued. His estate has worked to maintain his music catalogue and support charitable causes he cared about. Despite the controversies that surrounded his life and death, Michael Jackson remains an enduring figure in the pantheon of music legends, remembered for his extraordinary talent and his lasting impact on the world. On August 5th, 1962, the world was stunned by the sudden death of Marilyn Monroe. The iconic actress and sex symbol of the 1950s and early 1960s, found dead in her Los Angeles home at the age of 36. Monroe's demise was officially ruled a probable suicide due to an overdose of barbiturates. Yet, even over half a century later, questions and conspiracy theories continue to swirl around the circumstances of her death, keeping the mystery alive. Monroe's life had always been a blend of the extraordinary and the tragic. Born as Norma Jean Mortensen, she overcame a troubled childhood in foster homes to become one of the most famous women in the world. Her beauty and talent made her a star, but her personal life was marred by failed marriages, substance abuse, and struggles with mental health. By the time of her death, Monroe's career was in decline, and she was reportedly battling depression. The night of her death, Monroe had spent the evening at her Brentwood home. According to her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, Monroe retired to her bedroom at around 8 p.m., taking her usual cocktail of medications. When Murray awoke in the early hours of August 5th, she felt something was wrong. The light under Monroe's bedroom door was still on, and there was no response to her knocks. Panicked, Murray called Monroe's psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, who arrived and broke into the room through a window, discovering Monroe lifeless in her bed. The official investigation was swift. The Los Angeles Police Department concluded that Monroe had died from an overdose of nimbutyl and chloral hydrate, ruling it a probable suicide. However, several inconsistencies and unanswered questions in the official account have fueled decades of speculation and theories suggesting foul play. One of the most persistent theories involves Monroe's alleged relationships with President John F. Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. Rumors of Monroe's affair with JFK had been swirling for years, and some sources claim that she also had an affair with Bobby Kennedy. This theory suggests that Monroe's connections to the Kennedys put her in a precarious position, knowing too much about their personal and political lives. Some conspiracy theorists argue that Monroe was silenced to prevent her from revealing sensitive information. The timeline of events on the night of Monroe's death has also been questioned. Some witnesses reported seeing Bobby Kennedy in Los Angeles that evening, despite his official alibi placing him elsewhere. Allegations have been made that the scene of Monroe's death was staged to look like a suicide, and that vital evidence, such as phone records and a diary that Monroe kept, disappeared mysteriously. Adding to the intrigue is the role of Monroe's doctors, Dr. Ralph Greenson and Dr. Harmon Engelberg. Monroe's personal physician were both closely involved in her treatment and were among the first on the scene after her death. Critics argue that the handling of Monroe's medications was reckless and that they may have inadvertently caused her overdose or have been part of a cover-up to protect their reputations. Further complicating the narrative are the inconsistencies in the autopsy report. The official cause of death was acute barbiturate poisoning, but the autopsy revealed no traces of pills in Monroe's stomach, leading some to speculate that she may have been injected with the fatal dose. Additionally, there were unexplained bruises on her body, raising questions about a potential struggle. Over the years, numerous books, documentaries, and investigative reports have delved into Monroe's death, each presenting new theories and evidence. In 1982, the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office reopened the case, but ultimately concluded there was insufficient evidence to support any of the conspiracy theories, reaffirming the original ruling of probable suicide. However, the mystery persists. In 2012, a new documentary titled Marilyn Monroe: The Case for Murder suggested that Monroe was killed by a lethal injection administered by her doctors, possibly under orders from powerful figures. The film cited new forensic analysis and witness testimonies, reigniting public interest and debate. Another compelling aspect of the mystery is the psychological state of Monroe in her final days. Friends and colleagues reported that she was in a fragile emotional state, but also determined to revive her career. She had recently been rehired by 20th Century Fox for the film Something's Got to Give, after being fired earlier that year. Some argue that Monroe was optimistic about her future and would not have taken her own life. Despite the numerous theories, the truth about Marilyn Monroe's death remains elusive. The blending of fact and speculation has created a legend that continues to captivate the public imagination. Was she a tragic victim of her own demons? Or was she silenced by powerful interests? The enduring mystery keeps Marilyn Monroe in the spotlight, a testament to her lasting impact on popular culture. In the end, Monroe's death symbolizes the quintessential Hollywood tragedy, a bright star extinguished too soon, leaving behind a legacy shrouded in mystery and speculation. Her story serves as a poignant reminder of the perils of fame and the often unseen struggles of those who live in the public eye. As new evidence and theories continue to emerge, the fascination with Marilyn Monroe's life and death shows no sign of waning, ensuring that her name will remain etched in the annals of Hollywood history for generations to come. James Dean, an emblem of youthful rebellion and cinematic prowess, remains a cultural icon despite his tragically brief life. His untimely death in 1955 has captivated audiences and has sparked numerous theories surrounding the circumstances of his demise. Born on February 8, 1931, in Marion, Indiana, James Dean's rise to fame was meteoric. His breakthrough came with roles in East of Eden and Rebel Without a Cause, which established him as a symbol of teenage angst and rebellion. Dean's intense performances and brooding persona resonated deeply with audiences, making him one of Hollywood's most memorable stars. Dean's life ended abruptly on September 30th, 1955, when he died in a car crash at the age of 24. The accident occurred on a remote highway near Cholame, California, while Dean was en route to a car race in Salinas. Driving his new Porsche 550 Spider, a car that he had dubbed Little Bastard, Dean collided with the 1954 Tudor, driven by Donald Turnipseed. The impact was catastrophic, with Dean's car overturning and Dean being pronounced dead at the hospital. The official cause of death was attributed to the severity of the crash and Dean's injuries. However, several aspects of the accident have fueled speculation. The Porsche 550 Spider, associated with Dean's death, was rumored to be cursed. Reports of subsequent accidents involving the car and its parts contributed to the legend of its curse, adding to the intrigue surrounding Dean's death. The details of the crash remain enigmatic. Witnesses reported Dean speeding, but there was confusion about whether he was racing another vehicle or simply driving fast. The intersection where the collision occurred was known for poor visibility, leading to questions about whether the road conditions contributed to the accident. Conflicting statements from those involved and the chaotic nature of the crash left many questions unanswered. Some speculated that Dean might have been distracted or trying to evade another vehicle, while others wonder if mechanical failure played a role. Despite various theories, no definitive evidence emerged to clarify the true cause of the accident. Dean's death has also been viewed through the lens of his cultural impact. His portrayal as troubled youths and his tragic end contributed to his mystique as a symbol of youthful rebellion. His career, though brief, left a lasting impression on cinema and popular culture. The fascination with James Dean's death reflects broader themes of fame and its consequences. His story highlights the pressures faced by young celebrities and the often unseen struggles behind the glamour of Hollywood. The mystery of his death, coupled with his enduring legacy, ensures that James Dean remains a poignant figure in American culture. In conclusion, the enigma of James Dean's death continues to captivate and intrigue. The combination of his tragic end, the supposed curse of his car, and the unanswered questions about the accident contribute to his lasting allure. Dean's influence on film and culture endures, and his story remains one of Hollywood's most compelling mysteries. I was finishing up my workday when I received a message from Malik, a guy who I had met on Tinder. His texts were engaging and thoughtful, with a great sense of humour. When he suggested that we meet at a vintage arcade for our first date, I was excited. It seemed like a fun and relaxed setting. The arcade was buzzing with the sounds of old-school games and flashing lights. I spotted Malik right away. He was standing by the entrance, looking just like his photos. He greeted me with a friendly hug, which felt a bit longer than usual, but not alarming. We started playing games and chatting, and I was having a good time. As the evening progressed, I began to feel uncomfortable. Malik's touches became more frequent. His hand would linger on my back, and he stood too close. I tried to brush it off, thinking that he might just be overly enthusiastic. But his behaviour soon crossed a line. While we were playing air hockey, he touched my waist and leaned in much closer than necessary. I began to feel uneasy. Malik's face was now too close to mine, and I noticed he seemed to be inhaling deeply, as if he was getting too close on purpose. I tried to step away, but he followed, placing his hand on my lower back. "Malik, can we have a bit more space?" I asked, trying to stay calm. His smile faltered. "Why? I'm just enjoying our time," he said, though his voice lacked its earlier warmth. I moved to another game, hoping the change would help, but his behaviour only became more invasive. When I laughed at a joke, he leaned in and took an unusually long sniff near my neck. I was taken aback. "Malik, what are you doing?" I asked, stepping away. His demeanour changed abruptly. His face hardened, and his tone became sharp. "What's your issue? We're just having fun. Why are you acting so weird about it?" he asked, gripping my arm. "I think I need to go," I said, trying to pull away. Malik's expression grew angry. "So you're just gonna leave now, after all this?" he said, his voice rising. I managed to free myself and walked quickly towards the exit, my heart racing. I glanced back to see him standing there, looking frustrated and confused. I didn't stop till I was safely in my car, locking the doors and driving away. That night, I deleted Malik's contact information. Based on our conversations prior to meeting up, I could have never seen it going this way. But I suppose there are plenty of fish in the sea. I matched with Tom on Bumble a few weeks ago. His profile was charming, intelligent, adventurous, and with a smile that suggested he genuinely enjoyed life. We hit it off instantly over messages, and after a week of messaging, we decided to meet at a local bar. The bar was a cozy spot with dim lighting and a relaxed vibe. Tom was waiting at a table when I arrived, and he greeted me with a warm hug and a friendly smile. The evening started off well. We talked and laughed over drinks, and Tom seemed to be exactly as he appeared online. But as the night wore on, I noticed something unsettling. Tom kept ordering more drinks for me, insisting that I tried this or that cocktail. At first, I thought he was just being considerate, but as the drinks piled up, I began to feel increasingly off balance. I was a lightweight when it came to alcohol, and by the time I was on my third drink, my vision was starting to blur. Tom's behaviour became more peculiar. He kept encouraging me to drink more, even suggesting shots of something strong. I hesitated, but his persistent cheerfulness and insistence made me acquiesce. "Just one more, it'll be fun," he said with a grin that now seemed a little too wide. By the time I finished the shots, I was feeling quite drunk, my inhibitions melting away. Tom's attempts to make me drink more were starting to raise red flags. My mind was clouded, and I struggled to keep my thoughts coherent. It was then that I noticed something strange. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw another man, a tall guy with a grim expression, sitting at the bar, occasionally glancing over at us. Tom was now pressing me to go with him to the bar's back room for a quieter spot to talk. My sense of unease grew, but I was too intoxicated to protest effectively. As we stood up, Tom's hand felt surprisingly firm around my arm, guiding me towards the back. The tall man at the bar followed us at a distance. Once we reached the back room, which was dimly lit and empty, Tom's demeanor changed. He closed the door behind us, locking it. "I think you've had enough," he said, his voice taking on a more sinister tone. "Let's just relax here for a bit." I was beginning to feel panicked. The room seemed to close in around me, and the effects of the alcohol made me dizzy. Suddenly, I heard a muffled conversation outside the door, and then a voice I didn't recognize. "Is everything set?" the tall man asked Tom. My heart raced.
What's going on?
I slurred, trying to make sense of the situation. Tom's expression was cold now, and he moved towards me with a menacing look. Before I could react, the tall man burst into the room, and I realized they were in this together. Tom grabbed my arm, and the tall man approached with a sinister grin. Panic surged through me, and I started screaming like a banshee. Just then, the door was kicked open with a loud bang. An undercover cop, who had been watching from the bar after growing suspicious of Tom's behavior, stormed in.
"Police! Stop right there!"
he shouted. Tom and the tall man froze, and the cops swiftly subdued them, pulling out handcuffs and restraining them. The bar's patrons had been alerted, and within minutes, more officers arrived. I was taken outside and given medical attention, while Tom and his accomplice were arrested. The whole experience left me shaken, but the undercover cop's timely intervention saved me from a much worse fate. That night, I deleted my Bumble account and vowed to be more cautious in the future. I was on holiday in Dublin, soaking up the sights and pints like any self-respecting bloke from England. The city was alive with its usual blend of lively pubs and historic charm, and I was determined to make the most of it. Eager to meet some locals and spice up my trip, I jumped on Hinge. That's where I matched with Erin. Her profile stood out. She had this infectious laugh and smile that practically leapt off the screen. We swapped messages about everything from our favourite pints to the quirkiest local spots, and our conversation quickly turned flirtatious. Erin was exactly the kind of woman that I had hoped to meet. She had that irresistible mix of charm and confidence, and the idea of spending an evening with her was even more enticing than any pub crawl. After a few days of back and forth banter, she suggested we meet at her place. Her flat was a bit off the beaten path, but I was up for it. She mentioned it would be a casual night with a few friends. I imagined the evening would be filled with laughs, good drinks, and hopefully, some sparks flying. The night of the meetup, I was buzzing with excitement. I had dressed smartly, hoping to impress, and followed the directions to her place. The route took me through increasingly deserted streets, and the quietness of the area set me on edge. I tried to shake off the feeling as I approached her flat, envisioning a warm welcome and a night to remember. When I knocked on Erin's door, I was greeted by two blokes who looked like they'd stepped straight out of a dodgy crime drama. One of them was a bulky guy with a scowl that would make anyone flinch, while the other one had a shifty, almost predatory look in his eyes. The contrast between them and Erin's bubbly personality was jarring. My initial excitement started to wane, but I brushed it off, trying to stay optimistic. "Hello, I'm here for Erin," I said with a forced smile, my heart still racing with anticipation. Without a word, the bigger bloke shoved me into the hallway. The sudden violence took me completely by surprise. I staggered, trying to regain my balance, but before I could react, he kicked me hard in the shins, sending a shockwave of pain up my leg. The other guy, meanwhile, was already diving into my pockets. I could barely breathe, the pain and confusion overwhelming me. My wallet, phone, and watch were quickly taken, and I struggled to fend them off, but they were relentless. As the bigger guy grabbed my arm and pulled me towards the back of the flat, I felt my adrenaline begin to pump. The dim light from a single bulb made the situation feel even more claustrophobic. The room seemed to close in, and my mind raced with desperate thoughts.
What's happening?
I gasped, trying to get some answers as I was shoved roughly. Suddenly, the bigger guy punched me in the stomach, making me double over in pain. I felt like I was losing control over everything. I tried to fight back, but the blows kept coming. I managed to wriggle free from their grasp and bolted out of the flat, my pulse pounding in my ears. I stumbled down the darkened street, the fear and adrenaline making each step feeling heavier. My escape made it feel like everything was happening in slow motion, each second stretching into eternity as I scrambled for safety. I ducked into a nearby phone box, my heart pounding as I dialed 999. My hands were trembling as I tried to explain the situation to the operator. The urgency in my voice betrayed the panic I was feeling.
Help! I've been robbed. They've taken everything.
I managed to say, my voice cracking. As I waited, the shadows around me seemed to deepen, and every sound made me jump. The quietness of the street only heightened my sense of vulnerability. After what felt like an age, the flashing lights of police cars appeared, cutting through the darkness. Relief washed over me, even though I still felt tense and exposed. The officers quickly assessed the situation and headed towards Aaron's flat. I stayed in the phone box, watching anxiously as they went in. My nerves were frayed, and every minute felt like an eternity. Finally, the police returned, their expressions serious.
The place is empty,
one of them said.
It looks like they've cleared out.
I was both relieved and disheartened. The robbers had vanished, leaving no trace of their presence. The officers took down my details and gave me advice on how to stay safe in the future. They assured me they would keep an eye on the area and follow up on any leads. I walked back to my accommodation, each step heavy with the weight of the night's events. The excitement I had felt earlier had turned into a grim reminder of the dangers of meeting strangers in unfamiliar places. I deleted Aaron's profile from Hinge and vowed to be more cautious in the future. It was a harsh lesson learned. The allure of a promising date can quickly turn into a nightmare. It was a late Friday evening when I found myself scrolling through dating profiles on OkCupid. After hours of swiping left on countless profiles, I stumbled upon Derek. He was drop-dead gorgeous. Tall, fit, with a chiseled jawline and a smile that seemed to light up his face. His photos were flawless, stylish clothes, fancy parties, exotic vacations. He looked like someone straight out of a magazine. Desperate for a change of luck, I swiped right. To my surprise, Derek swiped right back. Our conversation started off great. It was charming, witty, and the connection felt real. We decided to meet up the following weekend at a trendy cafe downtown. On the day of the date, I was a bundle of nerves and excitement. I arrived early, nervously checking my phone every few minutes for any updates from Derek. So when a man walked into the cafe, I did a double take. He was nothing like the Derek in his photos. This man was significantly heavier, dressed in worn-out clothes and had a face marked by deep scars. He didn't even remotely resemble the Derek I had been chatting with. He came over and introduced himself. and I could barely mask my shock and disappointment. I hoped this was some kind of cruel prank or horrible mistake. I forced myself to sit through the date, trying to be polite, while my mind raced with questions. The conversation was strained, and every second felt like an eternity. As soon as I could, I made an excuse about having a sudden emergency and stood up to leave. But as I tried to walk past him, his demeanor changed drastically. He stood up and blocked my way, his face twisted with anger.
What's wrong?
He shouted, his voice echoing through the cafe.
You're just going to leave me like this?
I felt a wave of panic. I tried to push past him, but he grabbed my arm with a grip that was surprisingly strong.
You think you're too good for me now?
He yelled, his voice breaking with desperation. The cafe fell silent as people stared, their eyes flicking between us. I felt a hot rush of embarrassment and fear. Several patrons stepped in, trying to defuse the situation, and someone called the police. Derek's rage only intensified as he screamed after me, his pleas growing more frantic. By the time the authorities arrived, Derek was being escorted out of the cafe, his shouts fading as he was taken away. I was left shaken and humiliated, surrounded by sympathetic staff and concerned patrons. The experience left me uneasy and wary of meeting people online. I never swiped right again without thoroughly vetting someone. That night, I learnt the hard way that not everyone is who they seem, and sometimes the consequences of deception can be terrifyingly real. I met Laura on Plenty of Fish, and we clicked almost instantly. Her profile was full of bright, engaging photos, and our conversations flowed naturally. When we decided on an ice skating date, she mentioned that it was a place that she used to visit with her ex. She seemed a bit apprehensive, but I reassured her that it would be a fun, relaxing way to spend time together and hopefully ease her nerves. Arriving at the rink, I spotted Laura immediately. She was already lacing up her skates, her face lighting up when she saw me. We hit the ice with a mix of excitement and nervous energy. We skated around, enjoying each other's company, and I couldn't help but notice how Laura's initial apprehension seemed to melt away with each lap. But then, I noticed a man lingering near the rink's entrance. He was scruffy looking, his clothes rumpled as if he had just rolled out of bed. He kept glancing at us, his eyes fixed on Laura. A knot tightened in my stomach as he drew closer. Laura's smile faltered as she recognized him. Her eyes widened and she stiffened. "That's Mark," she said quietly, her voice tinged with unease. Mark's presence was like a sudden chill in the air. He marched over, his face a storm of frustration and anger.
"Laura!"
he demanded, his voice carrying over the rink's ambient noise. Laura's initial attempt at calm was met with Mark's growing hostility. I could see Laura's anxiety rising as Mark's gaze shifted to me, his expression darkening.
"So this is who you've moved on with?"
he spat, his tone harsh and accusatory. Laura tried to explain that it was just a casual date, but Mark wasn't interested in explanations. His anger seemed to grow with each word, and the tension between us escalated quickly. Mark's aggression was unsettling, making me feel increasingly uncomfortable. I could see Laura trying to manage the situation, her attempts to calm Mark only making his anger more volatile. The other skaters and rink staff began to take notice, their concerned whispers and glances adding to the mounting pressure. Suddenly, Mark shoved me roughly, causing me to lose my balance and fall against the rink's barrier. Laura rushed to help me up, but Mark's anger showed no sign of abating. The rink staff quickly intervened, asking Mark to leave and escorting him out. Mark's angry shouts continued as he was led away, and I could see Laura's distress. Laura and I decided to cut the date short. We left the rink, both shaken and uneasy about what had just happened. Although Mark's threats were loud and disturbing, the immediate danger had passed. We reported the incident to the police, who assured us they would look into it, but no further action was taken. In the following days, Laura and I occasionally received unsettling messages from Mark, but he never appeared again. Despite the ordeal, Laura and I tried to move on, but the memory of that night lingered, a reminder of how quickly a seemingly innocent date can take a turn for the worst. I used to live in a neighborhood across the street from a graveyard. Strange things have occurred throughout my life, even when I didn't live in that neighborhood. However, when I did live there, things happened more frequently than normal. I lived with my stepdad, my mum, my biological sister, and some step-siblings at the time. My stepbrother and I shared a room. We were in the 3rd grade. We slept in a bunk bed, and I slept on the top bunk. One night when we were going to bed, I heard something that made my eyes open wide. Our closet door, which was straight ahead beyond the foot of our bed, slowly crept open, making a haunting, almost vocal sound. I remember not knowing if my stepbrother was asleep in the bottom bunk, so I whisper yelled, "Zone!" I then tried a bit louder.
"Zone, did you hear that?"
I heard my brother make a horrible gasp, the kind of gasp someone makes when they see something terrible. I looked into the closet and saw 2 green eyes staring at me, and then at Zone. The 2 horrible eyes were hanging above a green, toothy grin. It kind of reminded me of the eyes and smile of the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland. It gave me goosebumps and made my eyes water. I wasn't sure what specifically it was that caused this reaction. As terrifying as it was, I threw my Spider-Man body pillow at it. My brother had one just like it. I know it was a pretty stupid move, but I was a kid and didn't have a clue how to handle the situation. The door nearly closed because of my excellent throw. However, it didn't latch closed. It was still barely open. After my brother and I sat in silence for a second, I asked him,
"Did you see that?"
He said,
"Yeah. One of us has to go and get your mom and my..."
Right when he was about to finish his sentence, the door to the closet started to open again. The high-pitched noise was even louder and slower than before. We were both horrified when we saw it again. The door revealed its glowing green face once more, still giving an ear-to-ear sickly green smile. This time though, Zone threw his Spider-Man body pillow at the door. The door squeaked and almost closed again. We watched it for about a minute. Then, it started to creep open a 3rd time. I don't know what came over me, but I said, "F this," and ran as fast as I could down the long hallway to my mum's room. I yelled and woke them up. My stepdad went into the room and switched the lights on. He opened the closet door and turned on the closet light. There was nothing there. My brother and I were yelling and babbling, trying to convince him of what we saw, but he didn't care. He tried to say it was the crappy fake glow-in-the-dark vampire teeth in the closet, but my brother and I both knew it was more than that. Even if that explained the face, it wouldn't explain the door opening on its own several times. Everything went back to normal for a while, except for when I woke up with a nosebleed a few mornings in a row. The next summer, I had to take summer school in a town not too far away. It sucked. I didn't know anyone. One day, everyone was sitting in the cafeteria area to watch a dumb play. It was Peter Pan. I started talking to a kid next to me. We seemed like we had a connection, like maybe we could be friends and hang out sometime. I told him about the green-faced thing. I think maybe because the play reminded me of that night. The kid's face went blank. He looked like a deer in headlights. He started speaking Spanish. Then his eyes started tearing up, and in a nervous whisper, he said,
That is Azazel. He's a demon.
A part of me felt bad for leaving my brother in the same room with that thing, but if I didn't, I don't know what would have happened. I have many more stories of true supernatural experiences. I'll have to share more. Thank you for reading. P.S. There are things out there in reality. If you know someone who says they've experienced something, please be there for them. It's hard to cope with these experiences, especially when you have to, all by yourself. This happened about 5 years ago when I was going through hard times and was homeless. I used to live in Denver, Colorado, which is where this took place. There are several cemeteries in the Denver area, but there's one on the outskirts of Denver which is very large and very old. I think it may be the oldest one that's still being actively used. Before I became homeless, I didn't know much about this area. I had always gotten a creepy feeling around there, but I didn't know why until I was on the streets. I heard from many different people that it's got lots of underground tunnels, and some homeless people live in these tunnels. But in the deeper tunnels, there is cult activity. These tunnels have secret entrances all over the area, and the homeless that live around this area avoid some of these spider holes because people have been known to disappear near them, mostly women. This area has a river going through it, alongside the graveyard. One side of the river has a darker feel than the other. It's eerie over there and smells like death. One time, I was wandering the area with a few other acquaintances. Safety in numbers and all that. We had nowhere to go and decided to hang out in the abandoned part of the graveyard, the older side. It had just gotten dark, and it was windy. It was also fall, so it was cold. We were huddled up against gravestones to block the wind. One of the people I was with knew the area better than I did, and he had warned me to be very vigilant. I figured this was so we didn't attract the attention of security, police, or fellow homeless, but I later found out why he was so anxious about the area. It was probably around 10 p.m. We had all been just sitting in silence, trying to stay warm, hoping the night would pass quickly, when I heard my acquaintance, let's call him Jay, whisper,
Hey, heads up. Keep quiet.
I had already been quiet, but I immediately tensed up, assuming that he spotted security or something. But as I looked around, I saw in the distance some small flickering lights appearing here and there all around the graveyard. It was like people had been spread all around the large graveyard, and they were all holding lighters that they flicked on, which only then showed that they were all over. After my eyes adjusted a bit, I recognized they seemed to be candles. I looked harder and could sort of see the outlines of people holding these candles. Jay whispered,
We gotta go.
We clumsily started grabbing the few items that we had around us. Jay came right up next to me and said,
Follow me, and don't look at them.
I was thinking, WTF? My other friend and I quickly started following Jay, moving at a quick walk straight to the break in the fence where we had come in. I was stupid enough to look behind me and saw the light/figures continue to appear all around us, and they were walking to the middle of the graveyard to stand in a circle. I passed by a few and saw out of the corner of my eye they were wearing black cloaks. I could feel the menacing presence and stares, like they were daring me to look at them. But I had an overwhelming feeling that if we left them alone, they would leave us alone. One thing that haunted me afterward was the way they seemed to move towards the middle. They moved quickly and smoothly, like they were gliding. A stereotype I know, and just seemed to morph out of the darkness. My instincts were on high alert. I knew whoever they were pure evil. We got the heck out of there, and once we got to the fence, we full-on sprinted for a few blocks. Jay didn't explain much. He just said to avoid those people and don't look them in the eye, or they could have power over you. I definitely had gotten that feeling from the encounter. I asked why they weren't scared of cops or security, and he said basically that they got away with what they did because the authorities didn't want to risk looking into it, because they didn't want to be targeted. I don't know how true this is, but I do know what I saw and felt. I had several scary experiences during my time in Denver, and some other stories about this area, so you guys let me know if you want more background or want to hear about the other things I've experienced or heard about this area. Jake and I had been best friends since high school. We both loved horror movies and creepy urban legends, often staying up late and talking about the scariest places in our town. So, when we heard about the old graveyard on the outskirts, we decided to visit. It was supposed to be one of the most haunted places around, with countless stories of strange noises and ghost sightings. It was a chilly October night, and the moon was hidden behind thick clouds. The perfect night for a spooky adventure. We parked my beat-up car at the entrance and hopped over the rusty gate. The graveyard looked even more eerie than I had imagined. Tombstones were scattered haphazardly, some tilted at odd angles, others broken and covered in moss. Tall trees surrounded the place, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, casting long shadows on the ground.
Man, this place is super creepy,
Jake whispered, trying to sound brave but failing miserably.
Yeah, but that's why we're here, right?
I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. We walked deeper into the graveyard, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. Every sound seemed amplified. The crunch of leaves under our feet, the rustling of the wind through the trees, and our own breathing, which grew heavier with each step. I tried to remember the stories I had heard about this place. The phantom woman who wandered the paths at night, the ghostly whispers, the flickering lights. It all seemed so silly in the daylight. But now, in the pitch-black night, it felt all too real. We stopped at an especially old-looking tombstone. The name and dates almost completely worn away. I shined my flashlight on it, trying to make out the engraving.
Hey, check this out,
Jake said suddenly, pointing to a large gnarled tree nearby.
There's a hole in the trunk. It looks like it could be a hiding spot for something.
We walked over to the tree, our curiosity piqued. The hole was just big enough for a small animal, or, as I half-jokingly suggested, a ghostly hand to reach out and grab us. Jake chuckled, but I could see he was just as nervous as I was. He reached into the hole, feeling around.
Nothing in here but dirt and leaves,
he said, pulling his hand back out. We continued exploring, but as the night went on, the unease in my stomach grew stronger. It wasn't just the graveyard itself, it was the feeling of being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something lurking in the shadows. After about an hour, we decided to head back. We started to make our way towards the entrance, but the graveyard seemed different. The path we had taken earlier now looked unfamiliar, and the trees seemed to have shifted. I told myself it was just my imagination, but Jake seemed uneasy too.
Did we come this way?
He asked, looking around.
I thought so,
I said, trying to sound confident.
Maybe we just took a wrong turn. Let's keep going.
But no matter which direction we went, we couldn't find the gate. The graveyard seemed to stretch on forever, the tombstones blending together in the darkness. Panic began to set in. I checked my phone, hoping to use the GPS, but there was no signal. Typical.
Let's just stay calm,
I said, more to reassure myself than Jake.
We'll find our way out, we just need to think.
We walked for what felt like hours, the cold seeping into our bones. Then, we heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the whisper grew louder, more distinct. It was coming from behind us.
Did you hear that?
Jake asked, his voice shaking.
Yeah,
I replied, my heart pounding in my chest.
let's keep moving.
We quickened our pace, but the whisper followed us, growing closer. I dared to glance back and saw nothing but darkness. The whisper turned into a low moan, sending chills down my spine. Suddenly, Jake stopped dead in his tracks.
Look!
He shouted, pointing ahead. In the distance, I saw a faint light. Relief washed over me. Maybe it was another entrance, or someone who could help us. We hurried towards the light, stumbling over roots and gravestones in our haste. As we got closer, the light grew brighter, revealing a small clearing. In the center stood a figure, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, holding a lantern. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, watching us.
Hello?
I called out, my voice trembling. The figure slowly raised its head, and I felt my blood run cold. Its eyes were hollow, empty sockets staring right through us. The lantern flickered, casting eerie shadows on its face.
Run!
Jake shouted, grabbing my arm. We turned and ran, not daring to look back. The whispers turned into shrieks echoing all around us. I could hear footsteps behind us, fast and relentless. My legs burned, my lungs screamed for air, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Finally, we burst through the trees and saw the gate. We scrambled over it, collapsing on the other side. The graveyard was silent once more, the only sound, our ragged breathing. We didn't say a word as we got into the car and drove away, our minds reeling from what we had just experienced. Neither of us spoke about it again, but the memory of that night haunted us for years. It was the night of December 21st, 1978, when the quiet skies over the Kaikoura mountain ranges on New Zealand's South Island became the scene of an extraordinary and frightening event. A routine cargo flight, TE-901, operated by Safe Air, was en route from Blenheim to Christchurch. On board were Captain Vern Powell and co-pilot Ian Petty alongside their crew. Their flight was intended to be uneventful, a simple hop over the mountainous terrain of New Zealand. But as they approached the Kaikoura coast, something strange happened. Around 11 p.m, the crew noticed an unusual light in the sky. At first, it appeared as a mere speck, distant and unthreatening. But within minutes, the light began to move in erratic patterns, darting across the sky and performing maneuvers that seemed impossible for any known aircraft. The crew, initially dismissive, soon realized that they were witnessing something far beyond the ordinary. The lights, described as pulsating and orb-like, appeared to be following the aircraft. They seemed intelligent, as if they were observing the plane, maintaining a close yet unnerving distance. The phenomena was so compelling that the crew contacted air control in Wellington, which confirmed that unknown radar targets were indeed tracking the plane. As news of the strange lights spread, the incident quickly gained media attention. On December 30th, just days after the initial sighting, a television crew from Channel Zero, now TVNZ, was on board another flight to investigate the mysterious phenomena. This flight, led by Captain Bill Startup, was accompanied by a journalist and a cameraman. To their astonishment, the lights reappeared, bright, glowing orbs that seemed to dance around the plane. disappearing and reappearing in ways that defied logic. The camera crew captured the eerie spectacle on film, and the footage aired on New Zealand television, creating a nationwide sensation. The media dubbed them the Kaikoura Lights, and soon the story became an international phenomenon, attracting the attention of UFO enthusiasts and skeptics alike. As the mystery deepened, numerous theories were proposed to explain the lights. The New Zealand Ministry of Defence, alongside the Royal New Zealand Air Force, conducted investigations but found no conclusive answers. Some skeptics suggest that the lights were simply reflections from squid boats, while others speculated about atmospheric conditions or experimental aircraft. However, these explanations failed to account for the erratic behavior and high-speed maneuvers that witnesses observed. Dr. Bruce Maccabee, a US Navy physicist and UFO researcher, examined the radar data and film footage. He concluded that the lights were indeed unusual and could not be easily dismissed as conventional aircraft or natural phenomena. Maccabee's findings fueled further speculation, leading to debates between those who believed in extraterrestrial explanations and those who sought more earthly causes. More than 4 decades later, the Kaikoura Lights remain one of New Zealand's most enduring mysteries. Despite numerous investigations and countless theories, the true nature of the lights has never been fully explained. For the witnesses, the experience left an indelible mark, a sense of awe mixed with a lingering unease. The pilots and crew involved were seasoned professionals, not prone to flights of fancy, which only adds to the credibility and gravity of their accounts. The incident has since become a part of New Zealand's cultural fabric, often cited in discussions of unexplained phenomena. It also stands as a reminder that even in a world dominated by science and reason, there are still mysteries that defy explanation. The Kaikoura Lights continue to fascinate, not just as a UFO story, but as a profound and unsettling encounter with the unknown. For many, the events of that December night invoke a sense of wonder and dread. It's a reminder that even in the most tranquil and picturesque places on Earth, the unknown can suddenly break through the veil of the ordinary, leaving us with more questions than answers. The Kaikoura Lights, with their eerie presence and unresolved nature, remain a haunting chapter in New Zealand's history, one that continues to captivate and disturb all who hear about it. In the peaceful town of Aramoana, nestled in the Otago region of New Zealand, tranquility was shattered on November 13th, 1990. The sleepy coastal village, with its serene streets and picturesque views, would become the backdrop of one of New Zealand's most harrowing crimes. David Gray, a 33-year-old resident, had always seemed like an ordinary member of the community, but beneath the facade of normalcy lay a growing rage that would erupt into unimaginable violence. On that fateful day, Gray embarked on a horrifying rampage that would claim the lives of 13 people, including a police officer, and would leave a community forever scarred. It began with a seemingly innocuous event. Gray had gotten into a heated property dispute with a neighbour that would leave him very angry. By the late afternoon, his agitation reached a fever pitch. Armed with a semi-automatic rifle, Gray embarked on a spree of violence that would send shockwaves through the small community. Gray's first victim was Gary Holden, his neighbour with whom he had a property dispute, but it wasn't long before he turned his eyes to the rest of his neighbourhood. The once quiet streets of Aramoana became a battleground. Gray moved from house to house, gunning down anyone who crossed his path. Neighbours who heard the gunfire, at first, thought it was an accident or fireworks. The reality was far more sinister. Among the first responders was Senior Constable Stuart Guthrie, a seasoned officer who arrived at the scene to find the village in chaos. As he tried to restore order and protect the remaining residents, Gray's violence showed no sign of stopping. Guthrie, brave and determined, tried to negotiate with Gray, but his efforts were met with more gunfire. Tragically, Guthrie was shot and killed while trying to shield a family. Desperate calls for help flooded the police dispatch, with witnesses reporting that Gray was methodical in moving through the streets, targeting anyone he could find. The scene was described as a nightmarish tableau, Gray's rifle spraying bullets, people fleeing in terror, and the distant sound of sirens struggling to pierce through the cacophony of violence. For those trapped in their homes, the ordeal was a living nightmare. One family, huddled together in a small bedroom, held their breath as Gray's footsteps approached their house. They could hear him moving through the garden, the sound of his gun, and anguished cries from other homes. The terror of not knowing if he would break into their home or move on was palpable. They prayed for survival, their fear intensifying with each passing minute. As night fell, the village was cloaked in darkness, but the horror persisted. Gray continued his rampage under the cover of night, moving with a methodical cruelty. Local and national media were soon covering the tragedy live, capturing the unfolding catastrophe in real time. The nation watched in horror as the small community of Aramoana became synonymous with terror and grief. The situation reached its climax when a police tactical team, armed and ready, arrived at the scene. After hours of relentless pursuit, Gray was eventually cornered. The final confrontation was intense and chaotic, with Gray continuing to fire at the officers. He was finally shot and killed after a fierce exchange of gunfire that left the area strewn with spent shell casings and shattered lives. The aftermath of the Aramoana massacre left the community in ruins. The once peaceful village was now a place of mourning and fear. The tragedy had claimed 13 lives and left countless others traumatized. Gray's motives remained as murky as the night he unleashed his fury. His psychological profile revealed deep-seated issues, but they did little to explain the scale of his violence or offer solace to the victims. In the years that followed, Aramoana slowly began to heal, though the scars of that night remained deeply etched in the community's memory. Annual memorial services were held to honor the victims and to remind future generations about the horrific events that transpired in their quiet town. Today, Aramoana stands as a chilling reminder of how quickly the veneer of normalcy can be stripped away by unthinkable violence. The massacre remains one of New Zealand's darkest chapters, a real-life horror story that continues to haunt the collective consciousness of those who lived through it and those who have learned about it since. On February 22nd, 2011, Christchurch, New Zealand was struck by a devastating earthquake that shook the city to its core. Occurring at 12:51 p.m. local time, the earthquake registered 6.3 on the Richter scale and was centered near Littleton, just southeast of Christchurch. The earthquake's shallow depth of about 5 kilometers intensified the shaking, leading to severe damage in the city's central business district. The timing of the quake, during the lunch hour, meant that many people were out and about, which contributed to the high number of casualties. In the heart of Christchurch, the quake caused the collapse of several buildings. Among the most tragic losses was the CTV building, a 6-story office building that crumbled, resulting in the deaths of 115 people. The Pine Gould Corporation building also suffered catastrophic damage, claiming the lives of 18 individuals. The destruction extended to iconic structures, such as the Christchurch Cathedral, which saw its spire collapse and significant damage to the building. The human toll was profound. The earthquake claimed 185 lives and injured over 2,000 people. The immediate response involved emergency services, including police, firefighters, and paramedics, who worked tirelessly to rescue survivors trapped under the rubble. The scale of the destruction made rescue operations challenging, and international aid was sought to support the local response. The economic impact of the earthquake was substantial. Businesses faced closures or relocations, and the cost of rebuilding or repairing infrastructure was immense. Key roads, bridges, and utilities were disrupted, affecting both daily life and emergency response efforts. The earthquake also led to severe emotional and psychological impacts on the community, with many residents grappling with trauma and displacement. In the aftermath, Christchurch faced a complex recovery process. The immediate focus was on providing temporary shelter and support to those affected. Efforts included setting up temporary facilities, such as the Restart Mall, which offered retail and business spaces while the city's permanent structures were being restored. Rebuilding the city required careful planning. The focus was on not just repairing damage, but also improving earthquake resilience. New building codes and standards were implemented to ensure that future constructions could better withstand seismic events. The central business district saw extensive redevelopment, including the demolition of unsafe structures and the construction of new buildings. Community resilience played a crucial role in the recovery. Residents, local businesses, and organizations came together to support each other through the challenging times. The solidarity and determination of the Christchurch community were vital in overcoming the adversity brought by the earthquake. The 2011 Christchurch earthquake stands as a significant event in New Zealand's history. It underscored the importance of preparedness and resilience in the face of natural disasters. The lessons learned from this tragedy have influenced disaster management practices and building standards across the country. Christchurch continues to rebuild and recover, honouring the memory of those who lost their lives and working towards a more resilient future. The earthquake remains a sobering reminder of the power of natural forces and the enduring strength of the human spirit in the face of disaster. I've always been a curious person, the type who hears about something shady or secretive and immediately wants to see it for myself. That's how I found myself getting into the dark web one night. I had read about it on some forums and watched some YouTube videos about the bizarre things that some people had claimed were out there. Illegal markets, creepy videos, all that stuff. But honestly, I thought most of it was just hype. Stories people told to scare each other. I figured I'd poke around, see some weird stuff, and call it a night. Setting up was easier than I expected. After downloading Tor, I started browsing, hopping from one site to another. It was mostly underwhelming. Sketchy marketplaces selling fake passports, stolen credit cards, and other illegal junk. But nothing that really shocked me. Just as I was about to give up, I stumbled on a site called The Watchers. The site was super basic, with a black background and a single red eye as its logo. There were no details or descriptions, just a single link that said, "Enter if you dare." I hesitated for a second, but my curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked it. The screen went black for a moment, then a video player loaded. The title read Live Feed 23. At first, the video was just static. I almost closed it out, thinking that it was broken or another dead link. But then, the picture cleared up, and I saw a man sitting in a chair in what looked like a basement. His hands were tied behind his back, and there was a gag in his mouth. His eyes were wide, and you could see the fear in them. It felt different from the usual horror stuff online. Too real, too raw. The camera was shaky, like someone was holding it but trying to keep still. It panned around the room, showing the guy tied up, the bare concrete walls, and a single dim light bulb hanging from the ceiling. It looked like an unfinished basement or some abandoned building. No windows, just one door behind him. It had this unsettling vibe, like something horrible had happened there, or was about to. The chat box on the side of the screen started lighting up. There were about a dozen people watching, typing these vile comments like, "Cut him and make him scream." I felt a knot in my stomach. This wasn't some movie or a prank. This was real, and these people were getting off on it. The guy in the chair started to squirm, his muffled cries barely audible through the gag. He was looking right into the camera, his eyes pleading for help. I wanted to look away, to close the browser and forget I'd ever seen this, but I couldn't. It was like I was frozen, my hand hovering over the mouse, but not clicking. Then the camera shifted, and I saw someone else in the room. They were wearing a black hoodie with the hood pulled up, so I couldn't see their face. They walked into the frame slowly, almost deliberately, holding something in their hand. It was a knife. My breath caught in my throat. The chat went wild, people urging the person to do it, to hurt the man in the chair. The guy started thrashing, trying desperately to break free, but he couldn't. The person in the hoodie moved closer, raising the knife. They dragged it across the man's arm, just enough to draw blood, and he let out this muffled scream that made my skin crawl. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This wasn't some sick joke or a fake snuff film. It was happening live, right in front of me, and I was watching it. I slammed my laptop shut, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt sick, like I was about to throw up. What the hell had I just witnessed? I couldn't get the image of that guy's face out of my head. The way he looked at the camera, like he knew we were watching, like he was begging us to do something, anything. I tried to tell myself it was just a hoax, some elaborate fake, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that guy, the fear in his eyes, the blood running down his arm. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a huge mistake. I deleted Tor, cleared my browser history, and tried to forget the whole thing, but it kept gnawing at me. What if that guy was still out there? What if the people running that site could track me somehow? A couple of days later, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was blank. I almost deleted it without opening it, but something made me click. It was just a single line of text. "We saw you." My blood ran cold. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. How could they have seen me? I hadn't used my real name or anything that could have been traced back to me. I was careful, at least I thought I was. I tried to convince myself it was just some spam or phishing email, someone messing with me, but the timing was too perfect. It had to be connected to that night. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't go to the police and tell them I'd been on the dark web watching God knows what. They'd think I was part of it or something. So I ignored the email, hoping that it would stop there. But it didn't. The next day, I got a text from an unknown number. It was just a photo. When I opened it, my heart nearly stopped. It was a picture of my house, taken from across the street, the same angle I would have seen if I looked out my front window. My chest tightened. Whoever was behind this knew where I lived. I started to panic, pacing around my house, double-checking all the locks on the doors and windows. I even considered calling the police. But what would I tell them? That someone might be stalking me because I clicked on the wrong link online? I spent that night huddled in my room, every little noise setting me on edge. But nothing happened. No more texts, no more emails. After a few days, things went back to normal, or as normal as they could be after something like that. I started to think maybe it was just a scare tactic, that they'd moved on to someone else, but I can't shake the feeling that they're still out there, watching. Sometimes I'll catch a glimpse of someone standing across the street, or feel like I'm being followed. I don't know if it's my mind playing tricks on me or if they're really there, and that's the worst part, never knowing where or when they'll decide to do something. So, if you're ever tempted to check out the dark web, take it from me, don't. Some things are better left unseen. Curiosity might not kill you, but it'll make you wish you never started looking in the first place. I used to think I was untouchable, that the internet was just a playground of information where I could explore anything and everything. I was naive, a little too curious for my own good. That's how I found myself deep in the dark web where I shouldn't have been. It started innocently enough. I'm a journalist, always on the hunt for the next big story. I had heard rumors about the dark web, a shadowy underworld of illicit activities where everything from illegal drugs to human organs were up for sale. I wanted to expose it, to shine a light on the darkness, but I was so wrong about what I thought I knew. I started small, lurking in forums, reading threads, but then I stumbled upon something that piqued my interest. A hacker named Mike, notorious for his skills. He was well known in those circles, someone who could crack anything and find anyone. I thought if I could just get him to talk, it would make for a great story. I created a fake identity, as I always did when working on these types of stories. Sarah Green, a tech enthusiast interested in learning the ropes of the dark web. I reached out to Mike, not expecting much, but he responded almost immediately, intrigued by my apparent innocence and curiosity. We chatted for weeks, mostly about harmless things at first. He would show me how to navigate the dark web, how to stay anonymous. I could feel him testing me, seeing if I was trustworthy. I played along, feeding his ego, letting him think he was teaching me, but every day I felt more and more like I was playing with fire. Then, one night, the tone of our conversations changed. Mike started to ask more personal questions. Where did I live? What did I do for fun? Did I have a boyfriend? I brushed it off, deflecting with vague answers, trying to steer the conversation back to our original topic. But Mike was persistent. His messages became more suggestive, laced with innuendos that made my skin crawl. "Sarah," he typed one evening, "I feel like we've become close, closer than I've ever been with anyone online." I froze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I should have cut off communication then and there, but I didn't. I was in too deep, too focused on the story. "I guess we have," I replied, hoping to keep him on track. His response came almost instantly. "I think I deserve something in return for all the help I've given you." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean. I've been more than generous with my time and expertise. I want something from you, Sarah. Something real." I tried to laugh it off. "What are you asking for?" His reply was blunt. "Pictures. I want to see you." My heart raced. This wasn't just harmless flirting anymore. This was a demand, a dangerous one. I typed out a refusal, trying to keep it light, trying not to anger him. But Mike didn't take no for an answer. "I've been nice, Sarah, but I can find out who you really are, where you live. I have that power, you know." I stared at the screen, the reality of my situation hitting me like a ton of bricks. Mike wasn't just a hacker, he was a predator, and I had walked right into his trap. I quickly logged off, heart pounding in my chest, but I knew it wouldn't be that easy to escape him. I shut down my computer, unplugged it, but the fear gnawed at me. I couldn't sleep that night, every noise in the house making me jump. My phone buzzed around 3 a.m. It was an unknown number. "I'm waiting, Sarah." Panic set in. I didn't know what to do. Blocking the number wouldn't help if he really could find me. A fake identity wouldn't protect me anymore. My mind raced through the possibilities. What could he do to me? Could he really find me? I had been so careful, but Mike was no ordinary hacker. He was skilled, determined, and now obsessed. The messages didn't stop. They flooded in at all hours, each one more threatening than the last. "Send me what I want. or I'll make you regret it. I know where you live, Sarah. I'm close, Sarah. So close. I began to dread the sound of my phone buzzing, my stomach twisting into knots each time. I felt trapped, hunted, like prey being circled by a predator. I started seeing shadows in every corner of my home, feeling eyes on me wherever I went. I barely slept, barely ate. I didn't know who to turn to. Who would even believe me? Finally, after days of torment, I couldn't take it anymore. I reached out to an old colleague who specialized in cybersecurity. I told him everything, voice shaking as I recounted the nightmare that had become my life. "You need to disappear," he said, his voice deadly serious. "Delete everything, every trace of your existence online, and you need to move. Now." I didn't want to believe it, but I knew he was right. Mike wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted, or until he destroyed me. So, I packed up what little I could carry and left. Left my apartment, left my job, left my life behind. I changed my name, moved to a different state, and started over, hoping against hope that Mike wouldn't find me. But even now, months later, in a new city, in a new life, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, watching, waiting. Every time I open my laptop, I expect to see his message. Every time my phone buzzes, I feel that familiar dread. I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, haunted by the fear that one day he'll find me again, and this time, I won't be able to run. The dark web isn't just a place, it's a trap, a vortex that can pull you in and never let you go, and I was foolish enough to step into it. Now, I'm just trying to survive the darkness that followed me back. I remember the first time I stumbled onto the dark web. I was 15, and the world felt so small, so suffocating. I had always been an outsider at school. The kids called me a freak, and I was okay with that, or at least I pretended to be. The truth was, I was lonely, and every day I fought off the constant sense of being invisible. It started off innocently enough. One night, after another dismal day, I was scrolling through a random forum when someone mentioned the dark web. I had heard whispers about it, but had never given it much thought. But the idea of a place where I could be anonymous, where I could see and do things without the prying eyes of the real world, was too tempting to ignore. I downloaded the Tor browser, and within hours, I was navigating through a maze of hidden sites, each more bizarre than the last. At first, it was just idle curiosity. I visited forums where people discussed obscure topics, buying and selling strange items. It felt exhilarating to be a part of something so secretive, but then, one night, I came across a thread that piqued my interest. People watching, the ultimate reality show. It was a live streaming site where users could watch hidden cameras placed in random homes. My heart raced with a mix of excitement and guilt. I clicked on the link and was immediately confronted with a live feed of an unfamiliar living room. It was like I was peering into someone's private life, and it was strangely captivating. Soon, the feeds grew more unsettling. I saw people who were being watched, people who didn't know their privacy had been shattered. It was disturbing, but the dark curiosity that gripped me made it hard to look away. It wasn't long before I realized that some of the people being filmed seemed familiar, like kids from my school. I started to notice patterns. A girl named Emily, who always sat alone at lunch, was frequently featured. There was Lucas, the football player who had once shoved me into a locker. The feeds showed them in the most mundane, private moments. Emily brushing her teeth, Lucas arguing with his parents. It was like I was a ghost, hovering over their lives, watching every detail unfold. The more I watched, the more I felt a twisted sense of power. I knew things about them that they would never share with anyone. I began to feel a sick pleasure in knowing that I could see them, but they had no idea that I existed. But I wanted to know more, to dig deeper, so I found a way to hack into their personal devices. Using skills that I picked up from online tutorials, I bypassed the security on their phones and computers. One night, after weeks of lurking, I found something I wasn't prepared for. I accessed Emily's computer and discovered a folder labeled Diary. It was full of her most private thoughts, her fears, and her dreams. I felt a pang of guilt, but quickly buried it under the thrill of my discovery. Lucas had similar files. His struggles with his family and his deep-seated insecurities. I had a front row seat to their personal lives, and it felt like I was living inside their heads. Then, something changed. I started to get strange messages on my dark web account. They were cryptic at first, just short, unsettling lines of text. I see you, you're not alone. I brushed them off as pranks, or just other users trying to scare me. Then came the video. It was an anonymous upload titled Watch and Learn. I clicked on it, and a chill ran down my spine. The video showed a montage of scenes from the feed that I had been watching. Emily, Lucas, and others, but there was something different. In the background of each clip, there were shadowy figures moving, barely visible but undeniably present. It was as if someone had been watching me watch them. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind raced with paranoia. What if someone had been tracking me too? What if my actions had consequences beyond what I could comprehend? The thought of being discovered and facing the people that I had intruded upon was terrifying. The next day at school, the atmosphere was different. I noticed students casting wary glances at me, and whispers seemed to follow me wherever I went. It felt like I was suffocating under the weight of their scrutiny. I tried to brush it off, but the feeling of being hunted was overwhelming. As the days passed, the messages and videos continued. Each one was more direct, more threatening. One message read, "Time to pay for your sins." I realized that someone was onto me, that the anonymity that I had so relied on was slipping away, that I had become the prey in a game that I never meant to play. One evening, I decided to confront the source of my torment. I accessed the dark web again, determined to find out who was behind the messages. I found a thread that seemed to discuss the same video that I had seen. The users were talking about how the Watchers would expose and punish those who abused their power. The reality hit me like a freight train. I was being hunted by the very people that I thought I could control. That night, I received an email from an unknown address. It contained a single line of text, "Come and see what you've done." Attached was a link to a live stream. I hesitated but knew I had no choice but to click on it. The stream opened to a dark room with a single chair in the middle. The room was empty except for a camera pointed directly at the chair. The feed was eerily quiet. Then, a figure appeared on screen. It was me. The realization crashed over me like a tidal wave. They had hacked into my room, my space. They knew everything about me. The figure in the chair was an exact replica of me, and it was clear that this was no ordinary prank. They had found a way to invade my privacy and were now taunting me with the consequences of my actions. The next morning, I woke up to find that my personal information, my address, my family's details, had been posted online. It was a nightmare come to life. I was paralyzed with fear, knowing that the anonymity that I had once taken for granted was gone. I was exposed, vulnerable, and my once anonymous existence had been turned into a living nightmare. In the days that followed, I realized the full extent of my mistakes. I had played with something beyond my understanding, and had paid the price for my curiosity and recklessness. The dark web had promised anonymity and power, but had delivered nothing but fear and consequence. I had become a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of crossing lines that should never be crossed. As I slowly retracted from the dark web, I tried to rebuild my life, but the lessons learned were permanent. The echoes of my actions haunted me, and I understood that some boundaries should never be breached. The dark web wasn't a playground, it was a realm of shadows, and I had learned that the hard way. When I got sentenced, I thought 2 years was no big deal. I mean, it was just a bar fight. Sure, I broke the guy's nose, but it wasn't like I killed him. I'd never even been in trouble before. I figured I'd keep my head down, do my time, and get out. Easy, right? But that was all a lie I told myself to sleep at night. The minute those bars slammed shut, I realized how stupid I was. You don't just do your time in a place like this. I was just a kid, barely 19, and the place was filled with hardened criminals, guys who spent more time behind bars than I'd been alive. The first day was the worst. I tried to keep to myself, but it didn't take long for some of the older guys to sniff out fresh meat. They could smell the fear on me like blood in the water. It wasn't long before a group of them cornered me in the yard, led by a guy they called Big Dave. He had a shaved head, muscles like a pit bull, and a spiderweb tattoo creeping up his neck.
"Hey, kid,"
he said, his voice like gravel.
"You looking to join up with your own kind? Or you want to get real familiar with the inside of the infirmary?"
I didn't even know what he meant at first. I'd heard about prison gangs, sure, but I didn't think it applied to me. I wasn't racist or anything, I just wanted to stay out of trouble. But in here, that choice wasn't mine to make. You either join a gang, or you become everyone's target. And it wasn't like I had the option to join the Mexican or black gangs. Not that I wanted to. They wouldn't have me. I was white, and that means I had to stick with the Aryan Brotherhood, or AB, whether I liked it or not. Big Dave wasn't giving me a choice, so I nodded, figuring that was all it would take. But I was wrong. Dead wrong. A couple days later, one of the other AB guys, a dude named Mitch, came up to me in the shower block. He was skinny, with a mean look in his eyes, and a scar that ran from his eyebrow to his chin. He shoved a shank into my hand, a piece of sharpened metal, cold and heavy.
"You want to be with us? You gotta earn it,"
he hissed, his voice barely above a whisper.
"See that guy over there?"
He jerked his head towards a Mexican dude on the opposite side of the showers.
"His name's Jorge. He's been eyeballing our stash in the yard. He's gotta go, and you're gonna do it."
My stomach dropped. I felt like I was going to puke right there. I can't do that, I stammered, my voice trembling. Mitch grabbed me by the collar and slammed me against the wall, the cold tiles pressing into my back.
"You either shank that piece of shit, or we'll do it to you. And trust me, kid, it won't be quick."
I didn't have a choice. My hands were shaking so bad I thought I dropped the shank, but somehow I kept hold of it as I walked across the shower block, every step feeling like it was dragging me to my own grave. Jorge was facing the wall, humming to himself, completely oblivious. I almost stopped right there, but Mitch's eyes were burning into me from behind. I gripped the shank so hard my knuckles turned white. I told myself it was him or me, but that didn't make it any easier. I don't even remember plunging the blade into his back, but suddenly it was in, and Jorge was screaming, a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my life. Blood sprayed everywhere, mixing with the water on the floor, and I just stood there, frozen. As Jorge collapsed, it felt like hours passed before Mitch yanked me back. His face twisted into a grin.
"Welcome to the Brotherhood,"
he said, and that was it. They pulled me out of there, and we left Jorge to bleed out on the floor. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, the way it twisted in pain and shock, and the blood. So much blood. After that, I was one of them, but I never felt like I belonged. The others were laughing, joking how I had finally manned up, but I didn't feel like a man. I felt like a monster. I had nightmares every night, and whenever I saw another Mexican guy in the yard, I'd feel my heart race, terrified that they'd know what I had done. I started counting down the days until I could get out, but I knew that even when I was free, I'd never really escape. Jorge's blood was on my hands, and no amount of time would wash it away. I'd gone in for a bar fight, just a stupid mistake, but prison turned me into something else, something that I couldn't even recognize. 2 years. It felt like a life sentence. When I first hit the yard, I was green, lost, and ready to do whatever it took to survive. That's when Jason, a long-timer with a nasty reputation, took me under his wing. At first, I thought I'd caught a break. He showed me the ropes, kept me out of the worst trouble, and I figured I had a decent ally. But it was all a setup. Jason had a plan, and I was just a pawn. One night, he handed me a package wrapped in brown paper with a slick grin. "This is gonna make us both some cash," he said. "Just be smart with it." I didn't ask questions. I took the package, thinking it was another routine hustle. Little did I know, I was being set up. A few hours later, I was yanked from my cell by the guards. They tore the place apart and found the package. Inside were bags of heroin, coke, and bundles of meth. They tossed me into solitary, and that's where things went south. In isolation, the guards laid into me. They were rough, demanding answers that I didn't have. They trashed my cell, ripped my clothes, and every attempt I made to explain was met with more violence. I was beaten and battered, left alone in the dark. Days later, when they finally let me out, I was a marked man. Word had spread. I was branded a snitch, Jason's pawn. Life on the inside turned brutal. Every day, I had to fight for scraps, food, space, and respect. I was constantly in brawls. My face was swollen, and my ribs took a beating. Jason had vanished, leaving me to handle the fallout. One night, a group of guys grabbed me and dragged me into a dark corner of the yard. They were furious, their anger explosive. They pounded on me, shouting about my betrayal. I fought back, but it was a losing battle. They left me bruised and broken, a stark reminder of my misplaced trust. The worst part wasn't the beatings, it was the isolation. I was left to fend for myself in a hostile environment, constantly watching my back. The few allies that I thought I had turned their backs, fearing retribution. Every day was a struggle, and every night was spent in dread. The guards, who once turned a blind eye, now had no sympathy for my plight. They watched with cold eyes as I struggled to stay alive. Now that I'm out, the scars are still there, both physical and the constant reminder that I got played. I'm sharing this story so people know the stakes. In a place like that, trust is a luxury you can't afford. Jason used me, and I paid the price in blood and bruises. It's a harsh lesson about survival and the cost of deception in a world where every move counts. I should let you know, I'm a woman. I'll never forget the day I was thrown into that hellhole. I was barely 17, scared out of my mind, and completely lost. The prison was a grim fortress of concrete and metal, and I had no idea how to navigate the chaos of life behind bars. For the first few weeks, I kept my head down, trying to blend in. I thought that if I stayed invisible, I'd be safe, but safety was a luxury I could hardly afford. It wasn't long before I noticed Officer Harris. He was one of the guards that seemed to take an unusual interest in me. At first, I brushed it off as paranoia, but his glances, the way he lingered around my cell, it made my skin crawl. One night, as I was trying to sleep, I heard a knock on my cell door. Officer Harris was standing there, his face hidden in the shadows. He told me there was a problem with my paperwork and that I had to come with him. I hesitated but followed, not wanting to draw attention. He led me to a back room, away from the main cell block. The place was dimly lit, filled with the stale smell of disinfectant. He shut the door behind us, and suddenly, the atmosphere changed. Harris's demeanor shifted from professional to predatory. "You know," he said, stepping closer, "you've been real quiet around here. Sometimes quiet people need a little attention." I tried to back away, but my heart was racing, and my limbs felt like lead. He grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. His breath was hot and stale as he leaned in. Panic surged through me as I realized the danger that I was in. "Please, don't," I begged, but he ignored me. His hands were everywhere, and I felt trapped. It was a nightmare I couldn't wake from. He was relentless, and I was powerless to stop him. It felt like time had stopped, but I was acutely aware of every horrifying second. When he finally let me go, I was left in a heap on the floor, my clothes torn and my body shaking. He left me there, saying nothing, just walking out as if nothing had happened. I felt humiliated, violated, and utterly alone. The worst part was knowing that this wasn't a one-time thing. Harris became a regular presence in my life, each visit a reminder of what he had done. I knew I couldn't report him. Who would believe me? Besides, there were whispers amongst the other inmates about how Harris had a reputation. I was stuck in a vicious cycle where I had to endure his abuse to avoid his wrath. Some people think female prisons aren't as bad as men's facilities, that we're somehow spared from the brutality and corruption. My story proves that that isn't the case. Inmates who noticed my bruises and distant demeanor started to question. I tried to deflect, but the rumors spread. I was labeled as someone who had special treatment from Harris. It only made things worse. The other prisoners became hostile, and I was isolated even more. The fear of Harris's visits was constant. Every knock on the door sent my heart racing. Every shadow made me flinch. The guards didn't help. They were either indifferent or complicit. I felt like a piece of meat, prey to a predator who had all the power. One day, Harris came into my cell while I was alone. He didn't say a word, just stood there, a smirk playing on his lips. I knew what was coming. My heart pounded in my chest as he approached, his footsteps echoing in my tiny cell. The wall seemed to close in on me. I braced myself, trying to prepare for the inevitable, when suddenly, the door burst open. Another guard walked in, catching Harris in the act. Harris quickly stepped back, his expression shifting to one of anger. He barked orders at the guard, and within moments, I was left alone with another officer who barely looked at me. The reprieve was brief. Harris had retreated, but he left behind a trail of fear and anger. I lived in a constant state of dread, knowing that Harris would find a way to retaliate. His visits became more sporadic, but more violent when they happened. I was left in a state of constant anxiety, never knowing when the next incident would occur. As time passed, I tried to cope with the trauma in my own way. I learnt to keep my distance from the guards and other inmates, using my isolation as a shield. I began to study the patterns, the routines, anything that could give me a slither of control over my life. But the fear never fully left me. I had to find a way to survive each day, knowing that my tormentor could strike at any moment. Now, as I look back on those days, the memories are still fresh. The fear, the helplessness, the constant vigilance, it's all a part of me. I tell my story not for sympathy, but to share the light on the reality of prison life and the abuse that can occur behind bars. Officer Harris used his power to exploit me, and I paid a heavy price for being a victim in a system that failed to protect me. My experience is a harsh reminder of how fragile safety can be in a place where control is an illusion, and trust is a dangerous gamble. I've been a prison guard long enough to witness my share of horrors. The kind of stuff that keeps you awake at night, makes you question how you ended up in this line of work. But there's one night that stands out, a nightmare I can't shake. It started like any other night. I was making my rounds, checking cells, ensuring everything was in order. The prison was unusually quiet, too quiet. I passed by the isolation unit, where we kept some of the worst offenders. It's not a place anyone wants to end up. That's where we had an inmate who had drawn more hatred than anyone I had ever seen. Around midnight, I heard a commotion coming from the isolation unit. Shouts, screams, the unmistakable sound of fists meeting flesh. I rushed over, my heart pounding. I swung open the heavy steel door to a scene that stopped me dead in my tracks. The inmate was on the floor, surrounded by a dozen other prisoners. They had somehow managed to get through his cell door, something I still can't explain. They were attacking him with a savage fury, using makeshift knives, broken broom handles, and their bare hands. The sight was so gruesome, it felt unreal. I moved to intervene, but the scene was too chaotic. The prisoners were in a frenzy, their faces twisted with rage and glee. I had to force my way through them, physically pulling them off the inmate. His face was a mask of blood and bruises, his clothes in tatters. His screams had turned into pitiful gurgling noises. It was like a mob had descended on him, driven by something much darker than mere revenge. When I finally got the attackers restrained, the reality of the situation hit me hard. The victim was barely recognizable. A broken, battered shell. The medical team arrived, but their efforts were futile. The damage was too extensive. As the chaos subsided and the prison returned to its uneasy silence, the truth emerged. The inmate they had so brutally torn apart was a child predator. A man who had molested his own daughter. The prisoner's rage was fueled not just by his crimes, but by the sickening details of his offences. The fact that he preyed on a child, his own flesh and blood, was the kind of horror that ignited a primal fury in anyone who heard about it. The aftermath was a blur of paperwork and investigations, but the scene left an indelible mark on my soul. It wasn't just the brutality. It was the cold, unrelenting justice emitted out by the other prisoners, a visceral reminder of the darkest corners of human nature. Every night, as I walk the dimly lit corridors, the memory of that night haunts me. The blood-soaked floor, the twisted faces of the attackers, and the horrifying truth of the victims' crimes replay in my mind. It's a reminder of the brutal reality that lurks behind these walls. A nightmare that refuses to let go. Okay, listen up. I gotta get this off my chest. I'm not a writer, so don't expect any fancy words or whatever. I'm just a regular guy, and something happened last 4th of July that still keeps me up at night. So, I live in this small town in the middle of nowhere. It's one of those places where everyone knows everyone, and fireworks are the biggest event of the year. Last year, my buddy Dave insisted we go out to the old quarry to set off our own fireworks. It was a dumb idea, but hey, we were bored. And the quarry's got this eerie charm, you know? We loaded up Dave's truck with a cooler full of beers and a bunch of illegal fireworks. You know the type, the ones that could blow your hand off if you're not careful. We drove out there just as the sun was setting, and by the time we arrived, it was pitch black. We set up camp near the water. The quarry is this huge pit filled with murky water, surrounded by cliffs and dense woods. It's kind of creepy, even on a good day. But that night, it felt particularly sinister. We cracked open a few beers, and Dave started setting up the fireworks. Now, I gotta tell you about Dave. He's a big guy, thinks he's invincible, and loves taking risks. Me, not so much. I prefer to keep my limbs intact. Anyway, Dave was getting more and more reckless as the night went on. He lit up a Roman candle, and for a few minutes, we were just laughing and watching the colours explode over the water. It was beautiful, almost magical. Then we heard it, a rustling in the woods behind us. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or something, but the noise got louder, like something big was moving through the trees. I told Dave to knock it off. The noise kept coming closer, and then we saw a flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. I was relieved for a second, thinking that it might be someone else from town. But as the light got closer, we saw it wasn't just one person. There were 3 of them, all dressed in dark clothing, faces obscured by bandanas. Now, I don't know about you, but when 3 masked guys show up in the middle of nowhere, it's never a good sign. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Dave, in his infinite wisdom, decided to confront them. He walked right up to them, beer in hand, like he was invincible.
Hey, you guys here for the fireworks?
He shouted, his voice slurring. One of the guys stepped forward and pointed something at Dave. It took me a second to realize it was a gun. My blood ran cold. This was no joke. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were glued to the ground. "Give us your keys," the guy with the gun said, his voice deep and frightening. Dave, being the idiot that he is, laughed and said,
You gotta be kidding me.
The guy didn't flinch. He just raised the gun higher. Now Dave's laughter died in his throat. He tossed his keys to the guy, who caught them with one hand. I could see Dave's bravado melting away, replaced with genuine fear. "Get on the ground," the guy ordered. We had no choice. We got down, face first in the dirt, and I could feel my heart pounding so loud I thought it might burst out of my chest. They went through our pockets, taking our wallets, phones, everything. I was sure they were gonna kill us. You hear stories about stuff like this, and you never think it will happen to you, but there we were, at their mercy. But instead of shooting us, they tied our hands behind our backs with zip ties and started talking among themselves, like we weren't even there. Then, one of them said something that sent chills down my spine. "Leave them. We'll deal with them after." They walked off, taking our stuff and Dave's truck. We were left there, tied up and helpless. For what felt like hours, we lay there, not daring to move. Every sound in the woods made me jump, thinking they were coming back to finish us off. Eventually, we managed to wriggle free from the zip ties. I don't know how we did it, but adrenaline is a powerful thing. We stumbled through the dark, back to town, terrified that they would be waiting for us around every corner. When we finally made it back, we went straight to the police. They didn't seem too surprised, which made me think this wasn't the first time that something like this had happened. They took our statements and promised to investigate, but I never heard anything more about it. So yeah, that's my 4th of July story. It's not something I like to talk about, but maybe sharing it will help me sleep better at night. Just remember, next time you're out in the middle of nowhere, be careful. You never know who or what might be out there. My last 4th of July was wild, and not in a good way. It was me, my best buds Ethan, Jake, and Jason, chilling at Ethan's place. His parents were out of town, so we thought, why don't we have our own little fireworks show? Ethan got these fireworks from some older dude at school. They were supposed to be legit, like the kind that makes the sky explode with colours. We set up in Ethan's backyard, which is huge and backs onto this huge wooden area. We started off small, with those little poppers and sparklers, just goofing around and having a good time. But then Ethan pulls out this massive firework he called the Destroyer. It was as big as my arm, and Ethan was hyped to set it off. He sets it up on this old picnic table at the edge of the yard. We're all backing up, excited but kind of nervous as well. Ethan lights the fuse, and for a second, everything seems fine. Then, the firework tips over. It's like slow motion. The thing's pointing right at us, and then boom, it explodes. I hit the ground, covering my ears. The noise was insane, like a bomb went off. When I looked up, the backyard was chaos. Jake was screaming, holding his hand. Blood was dripping from his fingers, and he was shaking. Jason was on the ground, clutching his leg. Ethan was just staring at the mess, his face white as a sheet. I could feel the heat from where I was lying. I managed to scramble to my feet and grabbed my phone. I dialed 911, my hands shaking like crazy. I could barely talk, just yelling our address and that we needed help. The paramedics and cops showed up fast. They took one look at us and got to work. Jake and Jason got rushed into ambulances. Ethan and I got checked out for burns, but we were mostly just in shock. The cops were cool about it, surprisingly. They asked where we got the fireworks, and Ethan owned up to buying them from some dude. They took the rest of the fireworks and gave us a lecture about safety. In the hospital, it was tense. Jake needed stitches on his hand, and Jason had a nasty burn on his leg. They were lucky it wasn't worse. Ethan and I felt awful, like idiots who almost got a friend seriously hurt. We had to call our parents, of course. Mine flipped out, especially when they saw the hospital bill. I got grounded for weeks, which sucked, but I guess it was better than what could have happened. That night changed things for us. We used to love fireworks, but now they freak us out. Every time I hear one, I'm back in Ethan's backyard, feeling the fear and hearing the screams. It's a reminder of how dumb we were. So, if you're thinking about doing your own fireworks show this year, just be careful. It's not worth risking your life or your friends. Trust me, we learned that the hard way. It was July 4th, and I was more than happy to be spending it alone. Fireworks and parties have never really been my thing. I preferred the quiet, the simplicity. So when my friends invited me to a barbecue, I politely declined. I had my own plans, pizza and a Disney movie marathon. I had ordered from Tony's Pizzeria, my go-to spot for the best pepperoni pizza in town. After making the call, I curled up on my couch, wrapped in a soft blanket, and flipped through the Disney Plus catalog. Beauty and the Beast sounded like the best choice for the evening. Halfway through Belle's opening song, there was a knock at the door. I paused the movie, grabbed my wallet, and went to answer it. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a Tony's Pizzeria uniform holding my pizza. Relieved it had arrived so quickly, I opened the door.
Hi, ma'am. Your large pepperoni pizza,
the delivery guy said, handing me the box. He had a friendly enough smile, but something about his eyes made me uneasy. They were too intense, too focused on me.
Thanks,
I said, forcing a smile as I handed him a 20 and told him to keep the change. He lingered a moment too long before finally turning and walking back to his car. I shut the door, locked it, and took a deep breath. I was probably just being paranoid. Back on the couch, I tried to shake off the weird vibe and get back into my movie. The pizza was as delicious as ever, and soon enough, I was lost in the world of Belle and the Beast. But then, just as the Beast was starting to soften, I heard another knock at the door. I paused the movie again, my heart skipping a beat. It was unusual for anyone to visit me unannounced, especially on a holiday. I walked to the door and peered through the peephole. The same delivery guy stood there, fidgeting nervously.
Did I forget something?
I called through the door, not opening it this time.
Yeah, I think I gave you the wrong order. Can I check the pizza?
Seriously?
I muttered to myself. I glanced at the pizza on the coffee table. It was exactly what I had ordered. Something felt off.
No, it's fine. I got what I ordered, thanks.
There was a pause, then a low chuckle.
All right. Have a good night, ma'am.
He left, and I watched through the peephole as he disappeared from view. My skin prickled with unease. Why would he come back if I clearly had the right pizza? I tried to relax, pushing the thoughts to the back of my mind. But it was hard to focus on the movie now. I decided to double-check all the locks of the house. Front door, back door, windows, they were all secure. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. About an hour later, I was finally starting to relax when I heard a soft tapping at one of the windows. My heart leapt into my throat. I muted the TV and listened. There it was again, a faint, rhythmic tapping. I crept to the window, moving the curtain just enough to peek outside. My blood ran cold. The delivery guy was standing there, staring into my house with a crazed look in his eyes. He had his hand pressed against the glass, his fingers drumming softly. Fear paralyzed me for a moment. Then, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. As I waited for the operator, I watched him. He didn't move, just kept staring, his eyes pouring into mine through the small gap in the curtain.
911, what's your emergency?
There is a man outside my house. He delivered my pizza earlier, and now he's at my window. He won't go away.
I whispered, my voice shaking.
Stay on the line, ma'am. Police are on their way.
I stayed on the phone, describing the man and my location. He finally moved, slowly circling the house, trying each window and door. I could hear the rattling as he tested the locks. Panic surged through me. What if he found a way in? Minutes felt like hours. I could hear the distant sound of sirens, but he seemed oblivious. He was at the back door now, jiggling the handle. Suddenly, there was a loud crash as he threw himself against it. I screamed, backing away.
Stay calm, ma'am. Officers are almost there.
The operator assured me. The sirens grew louder, and I could see the flashing lights approaching. The man must have heard them too, because he abruptly stopped his assault on the door and bolted into the darkness. The police arrived moments later. I watched through the living room window as the man tried to scale the fence in my backyard. One officer tackled him to the ground with brutal force, and the others quickly surrounded him. He struggled, shouting obscenities and trying to break free. But the officers were relentless. They pinned him down, cuffing his hands behind his back. I could see the delivery guy's face contort with pain and anger as the officers roughly dragged him to his feet. One of them gave him a shove, making him stumble. They weren't being gentle, and I could hear him yelp in pain. They forced him into the back of a police car, slamming the door shut. An officer knocked on my door a few minutes later, and I opened it cautiously. "Ma'am, are you alright?" he asked, his face kind but serious.
Yes, thank you. I was really scared.
I admitted, my voice trembling. "We've got him in custody. He won't be bothering you again," he assured me. "Do you have anybody you can stay with tonight? It might be a good idea." I nodded.
Yes, my friend Hannah. She's coming to get me.
"Good. We'll patrol the area for the rest of the night. If you need anything, don't hesitate to call."
Thank you,
I said again, feeling a wave of relief. Hannah arrived soon after, and we gathered my things quickly. I didn't want to spend another second in that house alone. As we drove away, I looked back at my quiet, seemingly safe home. The glow of the distant fireworks illuminated the night sky, but all I felt was a lingering sense of dread. The holiday was meant to be a time of celebration and freedom, but for me, it had turned into a night of terror that I'd never forget. Hannah's place was a sanctuary, and I finally felt safe. But as I lay in her guest room, I couldn't help but wonder if he would have succeeded in breaking in if the police hadn't arrived in time. The thought haunted me as I drifted into a restless sleep. The echoes of fireworks mingling with my fear. On a hot summer day, I was home alone, sweating buckets because the AC was busted. I had all the windows wide open, trying to catch a breeze. It was quiet, too quiet for a neighborhood that's usually bustling with noise. I was chilling in the living room, trying to read, but mostly just nodding off. As the sun started setting, I noticed the kitchen window was still open. I went over to shut it, annoyed at myself for forgetting. Just as I was about to close it, I saw a shadow move past the front door. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze. "Hey, who's there?" I yell, trying to sound tough, but my voice wobbling. No answer. I grabbed a heavy book and tiptoed towards the hallway, where I heard noises from my bedroom. Peeking around the corner, I saw someone rummaging through my stuff, stuffing things into a bag. "Get out of my house!" I shouted, trying to scare him off. He turned towards me, big and scary looking. Instead of running, he charged at me. I swung the book, but he grabbed it and knocked me down. I scrambled to my feet and bolted to the bathroom, locking the door behind me. I called 911, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. "There's a guy in my house, hurry!" I whispered urgently. I heard him banging on the bathroom door, yelling to let him in. "I'm calling the cops!" I screamed back, hoping he'd back off. He cursed at me and I heard him running through the house. Outside, I heard sirens approaching. Relieved, I stayed in the bathroom until the police came in. They searched the house, but the guy was gone. They said a neighbor saw him fleeing who called 911 as well. I was scared out of my mind, but grateful I was safe. After that, I made sure all the doors and windows were locked tight, and I double-checked them every night. It was one of those sticky summer nights when the air was thick and the stars barely peeked through the haze. My buddy Mike and I decided to take a walk down the old trail near town, looking for a quiet spot to have a campfire and crack open a few beers. We were always up for an adventure, especially in the summer, when the woods felt alive with mystery. As we strolled along the trail, the sounds of crickets and rustling leaves filled the air. The moon cast airy shadows, making everything seem a bit spooky, but exciting at the same time. We found a clearing by a small creek, perfect for our night out. We set up our makeshift campfire, laughing and joking about old times as we cracked open our first beers. The fire crackled, sending sparks dancing into the darkness. The warmth was comforting, the beer cooling our throats as we talked about anything and everything. But as the night wore on, a sense of unease settled over us. Maybe it was the way the trees whispered in the wind, or the way the shadows seemed to stretch a bit too far. Mike joked about ghosts and monsters, trying to brush off the eerie feeling creeping up on us. Suddenly, I noticed movement at the edge of the clearing. A figure standing among the trees, watching us. My stomach dropped, and I nudged Mike, pointing discreetly. He squinted into the darkness, his face growing serious. "Hey, who's there?" Mike called out, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet night. No response. The figure didn't move, just stood there, silent and unmoving. A chill ran down my spine as we both stared, waiting for something, anything. Then, without warning, the figure started walking towards us, slow and deliberate. Mike stood up, stepping in front of me, protectively. "Hey, stay back!" he shouted, his voice trembling slightly. As the figure came closer, we could make out more details. A tall, thin man with a ragged jacket and wild eyes. His face was hidden in the shadows, but we could feel his intent, something dark and menacing. I grabbed a stick from the fire, holding it like a makeshift weapon. "We don't want any trouble," I called out, trying to sound braver than I actually was. But the man kept coming, his steps quickening. Panic surged through me as I already realized he wasn't going to stop. Mike yelled again, louder this time, warning him to stay away. Then in an instant, the man lunged at us, a guttural scream tearing through the night. Mike swung the stick, catching him across the shoulder, but it didn't slow him down. He knocked Mike to the ground, the force of the impact knocking the wind out of him. I screamed, scrambling backwards as the man turned towards me, his eyes burning with rage. Adrenaline flooded my veins as I swung the stick, desperation giving me strength. It connected with his arm, but he barely flinched, grabbing me by the collar. Fear consumed me as he pulled me close, his breath hot and foul against my ear. "You shouldn't have come here," he hissed, his voice low and menacing. I struggled, kicking and punching, trying to break free. Mike recovered quickly and tackled the man from behind, knocking him off balance. We scrambled away, adrenaline and fear driving us to run as fast as we could through the woods behind us. The man cursed and shouted, his footsteps thundering after us. Branches slapped against our faces, roots tripped us up. But we didn't stop until we burst out onto the main trail, gasping for breath. We didn't look back until we were safely back in town, surrounded by streetlights and the comforting hum of civilization. We called the police, trying to explain what had happened through shaky breaths and tears. They searched the woods but found no trace of the man. They told us to stay safe and call if we saw him again, but the memory of those wild eyes and that chilling threat haunted us long after that summer night, a reminder that darkness could lurk, even in the most peaceful places. This is one of the most traumatic experiences from my childhood. I don't like talking about it, but I figured that if I just write this out once, it will bring me some closure. It was the hottest summer I could remember, the kind where the air sticks to your skin like syrup. School was out, and every day felt like an adventure waiting to happen. I was 9 years old, full of energy and curiosity, and my best friend Ellie and I spent every moment we could exploring our neighborhood. One scorching afternoon, Ellie and I decided to ride our bikes to the park. It was a favorite hangout, with its sprawling fields and shady trees offering relief from the relentless sun. We played on the swings and raced each other around the empty playground until our laughter echoed throughout the empty park. As the afternoon stretched on, we noticed a man sitting alone on a bench near the edge of the park. He was wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, even though the sun was already starting to set. Ellie nudged me, whispering that she had never seen him there before. We watched him quietly, a feeling of unease sitting over us like a heavy blanket. Curiosity got the best of us, and we decided to ride our bikes closer to get a better look. As we approached, the man glanced up, his eyes locking onto us with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. I felt uneasy, but Ellie, always the bolder one, greeted him with a tentative smile.
Hi,
she said, her voice tinged with nervousness. The man didn't reply at first, just stared at us with an unsettling expression. Then with a slight grin, he asked, "Do you girls like ice cream? I know a place not far from here that has the best ice cream in town." Alarm bells went off in my head. Ellie looked at me, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. Something about the man's offer didn't sit right with either of us, but we were too polite and too scared to just turn around and leave.
Maybe another time,
Ellie replied hesitantly, her hand tightening on her bike handle. The man's grin widened, revealing yellow teeth. "Come on, it'll be fun. I'll even buy you both a cone," he urged, his voice coaxing but firm.
"We really should be going,"
I piped up, my voice trembling despite my attempt to sound brave. That's when things took a sinister turn. The man's smile vanished, replaced by a dark scowl. In a swift motion, he stood up and lunged towards us. Ellie and I screamed in terror, pedaling our bikes as fast as we could. The man chased after us, his footsteps pounding on the pavement behind us. Heart racing, I glanced back and saw him gaining on us. Panic surged through me as I urged my legs to pedal faster, tears streaming down my face. Ellie was ahead of me, her bike wobbling as she fought to keep her balance. We raced through the park, weaving between trees and playground equipment. Fear consumed us, but we dared not look back again, knowing the man was still hot on our heels. The sun was setting fast, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out and grab us as we rode. Finally, we reached the edge of the park where our neighborhood began. With a burst of adrenaline-fueled strength, we pedaled even harder, tears blurring my vision. I could hear Ellie crying ahead of me, her sobs mixing with mine. Just as I thought we couldn't go on any further, we turned onto our street and saw our houses up ahead. We screamed for help as loud as we could, praying that someone would hear us and come to our rescue. Thankfully, a neighbor watering his lawn heard our cries and rushed over. The man, realizing he had been spotted, turned and disappeared into the fading light. The neighbor comforted us, calling the police while Ellie's mum came running out of her house, tears streaming down her face. The police arrived quickly, but the man was long gone. They took our statements and searched the park, but there was no sign of him. Ellie and I were shaken to the core, clinging to each other as our parents held us close. That night, as I laid in bed, the events of the day replayed in my mind like a horror movie. I couldn't shake the image of the man's sinister grin or the sound of his footsteps chasing us through the park. Summer, once a season of freedom and fun, had turned into a nightmare I would never forget. To start off, I'm a 5'8", 150-pound male with the strength and ferocity of a cold, moist noodle. I'm a morning person and thought I'd shift off some packages before work. It was about 5 a.m. I parked my car facing the parcel machine, left the engine running, and went about my business. I noticed two guys in dark hoodies. It was 75 degrees Fahrenheit outside, about 50 feet from me, conversing with each other. I didn't pay much attention. Just when I had pulled out my wallet and was about to pay for shipping, both made a beeline towards me. They seemed quite nervous and were looking around. They were about 10-15 feet from me, and my fight or flight response started to kick in. At least I hope it would, because all I did was freeze and look dumbfounded. I have a conspicuous dash cam mounted under the rearview mirror, well visible to anyone passing by, and difficult to mistake for anything else. One of the guys most likely caught a glimpse of the camera, turned his head away, and tried to cover his face. The one closer to me stopped, visibly confused, and confronted the one concealing his face. I couldn't hear what they whispered, but some of the words may have been "don't" and "away." The leader turned to me, mumbled something, and asked if I could tell him the correct time. I did, and they walked away. Sure, two guys in the smartphone era, and none of them has the correct time. Not to mention the fact that the business complex had a large exterior LED screen displaying the current air temperature and time. It seems absurd from every angle. Why would a common street thug fear a dash cam? They could have just yanked it out. Plus, the storefront had one camera pointing at the parcel machine. And if they weren't muggers, that's an awfully weird way to ask for the time. I'm keeping my dash cam as a good luck charm, if nothing else. In 2021, I was involved in a murder case involving the father of my childhood friend. I frequently slept over at his house, maybe 3 times a month on Saturdays. He and his father never got along, mostly because his father was an abusive alcoholic. However, they never argued in front of people. Whether it was to save face or for some other reason, I don't know. But I never witnessed it. This was just what I was told about him. We were playing on his PS4 at the time when his dad called him downstairs. I assumed he'd be back soon, so I paused the game and went on my phone. However, they kept shouting for so long that I got tired of it, turned the game back on, and raised the TV volume close to maximum. Despite this, I could still hear them, though it mostly sounded muffled. About 20 minutes later, I heard what sounded like a glass bottle breaking. I was scared and didn't know how to respond, so I stayed in the room for 30 minutes. Eventually, I decided to check, since my friend still hadn't come upstairs. When I went downstairs, I saw his dad lying in the conservatory, bleeding from the back of his head. I initially thought they had argued, leading my friend to hit his dad, rendering him unconscious, but the man was dead. There was no pulse. I could elaborate on how we acted, but I'll skip that. We hid the body in a barrel, similar to a white oak American barrel. We were young and knew it would be discovered eventually, but it was mostly to buy time. I was also worried about being sent to jail and didn't want to confess my involvement. My friend gaslighted me into helping, saying that I would suffer too if I didn't. I wasn't in the right headspace when I was young, so I believed everything that he said. We put the body in the barrel to cover the smell, as there were no openings aside from the cover. 3 days later, my friend turned himself in. I didn't get charged because they considered my age and mental state. My former childhood friend, whom I'm not allowed to contact again, got 6 months in juvenile detention. The court ruled it as self-defense because the father was abusive and the act was accidental. He was close to being charged with manslaughter because we hid the body for a few days, but he was lucky. He claimed he was just scared his father would kill him, though I know he acted in a fit of rage. These events took place when I was about 8 years old. I lived on the second story of an older yellow house. My bedroom had a big walk-in closet with something unusual living inside of it. As a child, I didn't understand that something was imaginary until one day I was playing in my room and mentioned to my brother about seeing a tall figure in a black cloak. He didn't seem to know what I was referring to, so I dropped it. I wanted to keep playing with my Barbies without him leaving, so I didn't say anything further. The tall figure had black skin and bright red eyes. He would talk to me, but he mainly liked to stay inside the walk-in closet, so I would play in there with him. My mum would catch me talking to him, but she told me years later that she thought I was just talking to myself since no one else could see him. One event I still remember is when my grandmother came up from Texas to stay at our house for a few days. She slept in my room since there was nowhere else to put her. I remember during the first night, we had to close the closet door, essentially trapping my demon friend. He screamed the whole night, telling me to let him out. It was a loud, deep voice that made the floor shake. I would try to talk back to him, but he wouldn't listen to me. I cried the rest of the night, but my grandma never woke up during this. Eventually, I did fall asleep, but the next day, he disappeared from the closet and didn't return for weeks. That was the scariest thing that ever happened to me in that house as a child. I remember when we moved houses. My parents needed to go back to get a few final items. I feared the house and wouldn't go in. So I sat in the car. I remember looking at the house since we were parked across the street. I looked at the windows, and there he was, standing at the window, staring directly at me. I was frozen, staring back at him. I was alone in the car, so I screamed and moved down in the seat. Now as an adult, I realized that wasn't a normal imaginary friend. It was a demon of some sort. Come to think of it, I never knew his name. I made up a name for him as a child. I used to call him Mr. Potato Head, because his skin looked curled up, like when you peel a potato. His skin was red underneath, and looked infected. His eyes were bright like burning coals in a fire. I remember not being able to look directly into them without feeling faint. Instead, I would just look at his hands, which were burnt as well. However, he was kind to me when my brothers were not. He would calm me down when I cried about anything bad that had happened that day. But I guess overall, maybe he had other plans for me. Thankfully, I'll never know. I was 14 at the time, living at home with my parents and my 10-year-old sister in a typical suburban house in Connecticut. I had always believed in ghosts, but I had never experienced anything paranormal, and I never wanted to. My mum has always been infatuated with ghost shows and paranormal TV. She finds it fascinating and is always open to it. 6 months prior to the event, my aunt, my mum's sister, was diagnosed with melanoma. It was terminal, and treatment did almost nothing as the disease progressed. It was really a waiting game to see when, not if, the treatment would stop working. Towards the end of her treatment, I distinctly remember a heaviness in the house. Whether it was my mum's sadness or just a general feeling, being home felt dark. For context, it's important to know the layout of my upstairs. My house was a standard 2-story, 4-bedroom home. My room was directly next to the staircase, with my parents' and sister's rooms being on the other end of the house, right next to each other. My house was oldish, not haunted old, but maybe 30, 35 years. The floors upstairs would creak if you walked on them, something my sister and I knew all too well as we would sneak around all night looking for snacks, only to be caught by my father. One night before my aunt's passing, I was lying in bed with my door open. The hall nightlight dimly lit the area, just enough so it wasn't pitch black. As I was lying there, I distinctly remember a gut-wrenching feeling of heavy energy and uneasiness in the house. I hated having my door open, but my parents had a rule that it needed to be for safety. Suddenly, I heard horrific, heavy footsteps running from my parents' room, down the hallway and then down the stairs. Fast, heavy footsteps. I sat up immediately and just listened. The footsteps went down the stairs quickly, with a heaviness that was the scariest part. Imagine a big man in work boots going down the stairs as if his life depended on it. Next, the light turned on, and my father hauled ass down the stairs. I could hear him searching the house while my mum stood at the top of the stairs looking down. I asked,
What's going on? And she asked me, were you out of bed?
I said no. My dad came back up, asked me the same, checked on my sister, who was sound asleep, and then double-checked to make sure no one else was there. My mum ended with, just stay in bed for the night, and left it at that. Nothing more. I remember being more scared than I had ever been before. It was my first unexplained encounter. My mum told me it might have been someone coming to visit before taking your aunt home. I didn't know how I felt about that, but either way, those footsteps remain in my memory. Forever. This wasn't that long ago. I went on a road trip to my family for a small reunion because the family was starting to break apart again. I was far away from all of them, so it was obviously going to be a long ride. After about a day of driving and pulling into gas stations, I needed sleep. Obviously, you shouldn't drive when you're tired. I pulled into a motel, which seemed normal at first. There weren't many people there, just some workers and a couple. Despite all the stuff that had happened in my past, motels weren't that scary, and I knew everything that happened at them was only in horror movies, not in real life, but I still felt slightly on edge. I went to the front desk, got my room, and brought my bags. I'd only have to stay there for a night. The room was cozy and had nice lighting, the type that comforts you. I got to sleep fine, but at 2 a.m, I woke up. A weird feeling washed over me, and I now felt very uncomfortable. I figured getting up and getting a drink or something could make me calm down a little. There was a coffee/tea machine in my room, and a cup, so I made myself some warm tea since I wasn't a fan of coffee. I drank the tea and then attempted to go back to sleep. Probably 5 minutes after I closed my eyes, the phone that you used to call the front desk went off. I knew it was best not to answer, but I was too scared, and I wanted to know why I was being called. I picked up the phone and just heard a faint buzz, like the sound you'd hear when the signal of a TV is cutting out, and it makes that glitching noise. I ran to the reception area, opened the door, and realized no one was there. Not the receptionist or any of the workers. Again, just a faint buzz and a radio going off in the back room of the reception. It wasn't a walkie-talkie, it was the type of radio that plays music. Keep in mind, this wasn't in the 90s or earlier. This was recently. Classical music was playing on the radio. In a way, this wasn't really that weird. Maybe I got a prank call, and the receptionist was just sleeping or something. And all the workers were too. This thought comforted me a little. I turned around, and a man was there. The man was tall, definitely above 6 feet. "What do you need?" the man asked. I told him about the call. He said it was a regular occurrence, and that it only happens to people who deserve it. Deserve what? I didn't ask. I didn't want to prolong the conversation any longer than necessary. I walked back to my room. During the rest of the night, the phone kept going off. It didn't stop at all. I got up again and went outside when I noticed the man standing outside my window, but with his back turned towards it. "What are you doing?" I asked him. He told me he just wanted some air. I went and got a drink from the vending machines. I walked back and realized that the man was gone. My door was wide open. I went back in, closed and locked my door, and got back into bed. Yes, I ignored my door being wide open. I was too tired and couldn't be bothered with anything else. I woke up again after sleeping for probably about an hour to the sound of knocking on my doors, not just my front door, but my bathroom door as well. Oddly, my door wasn't locked, but I ran at it. If someone was out there, I'd knock them over and have time to get to the front desk. I got to the front desk, and this time the receptionist was there. I told him about everything that had just happened. He told me I sounded crazy. I told him about the call. He told me that that never happens, and that whoever told me that doesn't work there. I went back to the room with the receptionist, and the man wasn't there. In fact, there was no sign of him at all. But I know it was real. I know it happened. I never saw that man again. Hello everyone, it's MisfitHorror here. I'm keeping my voice down because they're sleeping. I hope you don't mind. Thank you very, very much for watching my mega true scary story horror compilation. This is my first ever video like this, so let me know what you think. Now please hit the subscribe button, which is on your screen now, because only 8% of the people who watch my videos are actually subscribed.